Prologue. 16 years old might have a big deal to some, sweet 16, the start of feeling like a real woman. But to Harrison it was just another day. She couldn't vote, could barely drive, and couldn't even have any alcohol. The pink and white balloons, the cut-out decorations that signaled she was indeed 16 today, were splattered across the backyard. Her fifth eve was over by the barbecue, and the guests that had already arrived were FRW of her friends from school, and some of the neighbors. She could have done without the show for her birthday, but although her father was this big, tough, and strong former SEAL, he was also the only person in her life that cared for her. After her mother passed away suddenly when she was only 2, it had just ironed her and her DACL. He, at times, went a little and beyond during celebrations and holidays, but she loved him for it, even if she felt she was old for those things anymore. Her dad looked at his watch, and she knew that one of his old Navy SEAL buddies was supposed to coming him. She had heard a lot. Damien Locke, a lion-shifting man that had saved her father's life when they had been overseas before she was bomb. It was of her getting injured, and Damien saving his life, that her had gotten a Purple Heart and had honorably discharged. "Hey, birthday girl," Zed, Hayden, her best friend since she had been years old, said from beside her. She elbowed Hayden in the gut, and although he grunted as if in pain, she knew that he was fine. "Your dad expecting someone?" Hayden asked and brought his can of Sprite to his mouth. "Yeah, an old SEAL buddy that he hasn't seen in years. Apparently the guy is moving to town." She stared at her dad as he flipped burgers, glanced at the side entrance of their house, then went back to handing out hot dogs and hamburgers. "His name is Damien, and Dad says he's this badass lion shifter that was this machine in the field, whatever that means." She took a sip of her root beer. "That means he is a badass shifter that can probably kill a man with his bare hands." She shook her head at Hayden's exaggeration, although it probably wasn't too off from the TMTH_a shifter, huh? She nodded and glanced at Hayden. "He'll be like the third shifter in this shitty little town." She chuckled, because he was right, on both accounts. Thistledale was shitty, with a small population of humans, and only TH.W shiners that lived inside city limits. Although shifters and humans lived side by side, the only two-part animal inhabitants were two panther shifters that were also husband and wife. Hayden made this non-committal noise, and started looking at Pamela Yuen, one of Danica's non-friend friends. They might have hung out when they were younger, but they hadn't been friends for a long time. But because Pamela lived right next door to her, apparently her thought that she needed to come to the party. "Your dad invited her," Hayden said without any disgust in his voice, and instead sounding a little turned on. "God, Hayden, please don't you and go there with her. You and I know that she makes out with the JV players behind the school." He lifted an eyebrow, as if he were intrigued. "Is it her that makes anyone with a penis lose their brain?" That had Hayden spitting out his Sprite as he laughed. "Oh shit, Danica." He looked over at her. His short blue-end hair was slightly damp from the surim in her backyard pool, and his light hazel eyes were crinkled in the corners as he tried to contain his laughter. "If you had a penis you'd know why being easy was such a turn-on for the male population." Danica stared at Pamela as she got out of pool, her string bikini totally inappropriate for a birthday party, and her breasts so big the triangles covering her nipples were barely holding. Hayden groaned. "Pamela Yuen makes me yearn for some very raunchy things. God, stop it now. If you only give me one thing for my birthday, make it sweet silence when it comes." Pamela. Hayden started laughing, but her upper arm and steered her toward the side of the house. "Your birthday present right here." He reached in the front pocket of his shon and pulled out a joint. "Holy shit, Hayden." Damar grabbed his hand that held the joint and pulled it down. Her father looked up, glanced around the backyard, and when he lifted his hand and waved. But when she lifted her hand and felt her nervous smile spread across her face, she realized her father hadn't seen the marijuana. A man walked toward her. huge, intimidating, and even though she couldn't see his face, and wasn't that close, she felt the aura of power leave him. Her dad and the guy embraced in one of those manly hugs, and clapped each other on the back. Danica stared at the guy. His darker blonde hair was cut short, military style, and his big muscular body was bigger than even her father's, and her dad was no creampuff. The man wore a white t-shirt, one that didn't do anything to mask the bulging muscles of his back and arms, or hide his tattoos that she could see through the light fabric. And his jeans, although slightly loose, fit him pretty damn well. God, what in the hell was she doing? Clearly that was her dad's friend by the way her father lit up and became animated. She was 16, and the guy had to be in his late 30s, which was her Atha's age. But her hormones had come alive when she had seen him, or, more correctly, the back of him. Come on, Hayden, I think I need that joint right about now. Dr11En was done, finished with fighting, finished the violence and death, and looked forward to silence of solitude. For better part of his 35 years he had been a SEAL, fought some of the most well-respected and brave men, human and shiners alike, that he had the pleasure of calling brothers. But his time was done, and he had the scars and lasting injuries to remind him of his time fighting Ivar that had taken lives, but also saved them. He stared at Tyler, his friend, brother, a man he considered family, and a long drink from his beer. The party that was being thrown was obviously for Tyler's 16-year-old daughter, although Damien hadn't seen Danica. Hell, he hadn't even met her. For all these years he had been traveling, fighting, and keeping busy with his missions. But as he looked around the large country backyard with an in-ground pool and a privacy fence blocking off prying eyes for about 20 yards ahead of him, he didn't see any young female that resembled Tyler, or smelled of his blood. "You're finally home, man," Zed, Tyler said and grinned. "Yeah, and I'm looking forward to doing absolutely nothing." Damien's entire life had been nothing but action, combat, and strength. It would be nice to just do nothing. They stood in front of each other, each on their second eye. The memories of his time in combat with this man filled Damien's head. He was a lion shifter, a creature that was stronger than humans, had better senses, and had been used for more dangerous missions. After he had saved Tyler's life, Damien had been reassigned to infiltrate a sex ring overseas. The assignment had lasted years, and tracking down and taking out the motherfuckers responsible had a pleasure. Damien wasn't human, not Ollie, and off that he was a lot fiercer than many mem. He was also a hell of a lot more dangerous than a lot of other shifters because he was more animal than human. "Well, brother, I'm glad you're back done fighting, and now maybe you can settle down." Damien nodded after Tyler spoke. The truth was he wasn't here looking for a woman to a life with, and a few hours between the sheets with a female was all he needed. The isolated and solitary confinement of his own home, a cabin in the mountains he had purchased years ago, was what he craved. Having someone live with him, sleeping beside him in his wasn't what Damien had envisioned for himself. He was a pretty dominant man, hostile and used to having his way in all things. What woman would put up with the male that was possessive and territorial of her? And that was exactly how Damien would be, to the nth degree even. 111 Worry about the female population later. Right now a few hours with them at a time is sufficient. Tyler chuckled and lifted his to his mouth. He finished off the alcohol and nodded. "Well, if you want a church going, this town is off to him," he grinned, and Damien shook his head, feeling amusement. "I don't think a religious woman is what I need, unless she wants to be screaming out God all night in my bed." Tyler burst out laughing, and it was like old times when they were LYMG in their bunks, trying to focus on other things, the death they had seen. "I haven't seen your girl," Damien said and brought his drill to his mouth. He glanced around the backyard, saw the young girls swimming and the boys splashing each other, but couldn't smell the blood relation to Tyler from any of them. Tyler's home was out of town, tucked away on 2 acres, with a large in-ground pool, thick trees adding privacy to the property, and a 2-story home. It was something maybe Damien would have one day. Right now he would be content just living in his one-bedroom cabin in the woods, relying on the wood-bumming fireplace for heat, and the silence to keep him company. I saw her running off with her friend Hayden. I'm sure they'll be back shortly. Tyler flipped a few off burgers. She's grown up, man. He shook his head. I can't believe she's already 16. Damn, in just 2 years she'll be 18, off to college, and starting a life for herself. Damien wished he could know what it was like to have a child of his own, one that was of his blood, who looked up to him, and that he protected. But his life had gone in a different direction, and his duty had called. Fighting hard for his country was what had planned for him, and a woman and children hadn't in his cards. He was older now, knew that he probably knew a whole the latter in his life, but he was content with how things had played. Got to take a piss, but maybe when I'm done I can finally meet this daughter of ours. He had seen pictures of Danica as a little girl, maybe 5 at the most, but he had overseas, fighting in the trenches, and male had been scarce but was the light of Tyler's life, and because Damien thought of other man like family and a brother, was one. Danica followed Hayden through the side entrance of the house, into the kitchen, continued moving through the living and finally slipped into her. She shut the door behind them, and although she wasn't allowed to have boys in the house without adult supervision, let alone in her room, Hayden was the exception. Maybe they had known each other for so long, or maybe it was that Hayden lived next door and spent as much time at her house as he did his own. Either way, right now, this worked for them. He sat on the edge of her bed, grabbed the lighter and joint he had put back in his front pocket, and grinned at her. But then he grabbed a toilet paper roll minus the toilet paper, and she saw it was filled with lint from a dryer. Although they certainly didn't get high a lot, they hung out with friends that did, and smoking in their rooms required some kind of ventilation system other than a window. The toilet paper roll and lint would filter out the smoke and smell of the marijuana when they exhaled into the end. It was crafty and makeshift but got the job done. After patting the next to him she moved away from the door and sat beside him. While he brought the joint to his lips and lit the end, Danica glanced at the window, could see the pool from her and also her and Damien. He was slightly facing the house now, and although she could see his profile, could tell he was gorgeous and had the classic square jaw and masculine features, she was too away to see specifics like eye color here. Hayden handed her the joint, his voice strained as he held in the smoke. Danica looked away from the window and grabbed the joint. She inhaled, watched the tip light up orange for a second, then handed it back to Hayden. He shook his head and exhaled into the end of toilet paper roll. Take another hit. He handed her the roll, and she exhaled into it. After taking one more hit off the end of the joint she handed it to Hayden, already feeling the pot walk through her body. After exhaling once more, she felt her eyes frizzy, felt her mouth dry, and glanced at the window again. She couldn't see Damien, but she saw her dad by the grill again. Flacking thirsty, Danica, Hayden said and lay back on the bed. This go smile on his. He took another hit, handed her the joint again, and although she should have said no, she took it. Fatta Joel, Hayden said and started chuckling. It's your birthday, after all. After she took another hit and handed it to she said, that's it for me, or my dad will for sure I able to tell I am high. And she was stoned, pretty damn stoned actually. Thirsty as flack. Danica, yeah, she needed to get some eye drops for her, too. She got off the bed, left her room and shut the behind her, and felt her cell vibrate in her shorts pocket. After grabbing it, frying to fuses on the keys and chuckling at the fact she was really fracked up, she started to text her friend Madeline back. Madeline texted her saying she was sorry she couldn't make it to the party, but that they'd get together next weekend. Danica glanced up, saw the corner of the hallway where she would need to turn and go into the and looked back at her phone to send the message. But just as she turned the corner she slammed into a very hard eval. For a second, Her brain was moving slower than normal. Danica thought she had literally MN into the wall. She dropped her phone, and when she went to pick it up she saw the pair of big, black boots in her line of vision. Slowly Danica started to stand, her head feeling light and dizzy as the blood suddenly rushed away. Then she was staring at her friend, a line-shifting seal, big and tall, and looking pretty damn intimidating. He inhaled deeply, his nostrils flaring, his pupils dilating, and she swore the all around them became charged. The hair on her arms stood on end, and for some inexplicable reason she felt this protective pull come from this man. She stared into his face, taken in the way his eyes were this strange amber color, and his shone blonde hair was perfectly styled, almost severe in its perfection. He had one of those square, masculine faces, not beautiful one or classically handsome, but sharp, all male in appearance, and lacking any kind of emotion. But it was the low hum, almost a purring sound, that left his throat that had her taking a step back. He followed, advancing like an animal stalking his prey, and Danica felt like she was the meal he was to devour. She didn't know what was happening, why she felt this weird tingle in the base of her spine, or why this man was tracking her like this, but she couldn't find her voice to try to stop it. And then the Ival had her retreat coming to a halt. Her heart thundered behind her ribs, and although she didn't consider herself a shrinking violet, she felt very small compared to him. "You're my father's friend," she said on a soft voice. He made that weird purring sound again, a mixture of softness, but also having a hard edge to it. She felt like it was a dangerous sound, like something he might make right before he slit someone's throat, but despite feeling that she couldn't find any fear inside of her he had yet to respond, and this weird intensity slammed into her from him, like a hot poker moving through her. It was a strange sensation, not unpleasant, but not exactly comforting either. "You're Danica," Damien said with this growl in his voice. His pupils kept contracting and dilating, and when he looked Cloud.tl_ closed his eyes, and shook his head, it was like he was trying to control himself. "You're Tyler's daughter." Again he didn't say it like a question, but almost like he was speaking to himself. He took a step back, breathed in and out heavily, and she saw the way he clenched his hands at his sides. "You're Tyler's daughter," he said again, this time with a little more determination in his voice. Danica had no clue what in the hell was going on. She was high, confused, and felt like she was standing on a tightrope, and was a black abyss. "I'm sorry. I don't know what's going on." Her lips were dry, her mouth feeling like it had a wad of cotton in it, and her pulse felt off the charts fast. And she looked out to see Hayden standing there, his expression kind of gour and his eyes bloodshot. She could be oblivious to the situation right now, too. "Are you talking to?" Hayden asked, and then glanced at Damien. His eyes widened as he took in the sight of other man. Danica." Damien made this low growly noise again, but this time it was deeper, more threatening, and directed right at Hayden. Damien took a step toward Hayden, and it was like everything stalled. "She's mine," he said to Hayden in a deep voice that had Danica's heart stopping. "Mut," Hayden said, knitted his brows, and looked at Danica. "You're what?" Maybe it was because Hayden was so high, he wasn't acting as though this beast of a man was staring him down. Before anyone else could say anything, Damien looked at her once more, held her gaze with his OU.N, and then turned to leave. But his movements were tense, and it was he was trying to force himself to walk away. After he left, she stood there, still pressed to the Ival, and Hayden standing in her doorway. Her father came in only a few minutes later, stopped at the end of hallway when he saw the two of him, and pointed his spatula to the front of house. "You know what happened to Danian?" She shook her head and swallowed. "No, why?" It wasn't a lie because she had no freaking clue what in the hell had gotten into him. He just said he wasn't feeling right and had to leave. Tyler shook his head when she shrugged, then turned and headed back outside. For several 1 minutes the silence stretched between her and Hayden. "In the hell was that?" he asked. She stared at the hallway where Damien had just left, shook her head, and tried to get her thoughts in order. I have no clue, Hayden. But that was the most intense situation I think I've ever been in. Damien had gone back to his cabin, slammed the door shut behind him, and roared out he was pissed, anxious, and his lion wanted out. He had just found his mate, imprinted on her, and she was the daughter of his first friend. Ilman he had seen Danica for that first time. The scent of her had ingrained itself in his cells. She was young, but he didn't imprint on her in a sexual way, but a way that I wanted to protect her, make sure she was safe and happy. He paced his living room, ran his hands over his short hair, and cursed out. Yucca shifter male found their mate, they imprinted on her, but it didn't happen until them were physically mature. Even when a male imprinted on a female, and the female was young, as in this case, the urge to keep his mate safe overruled everything. He didn't see Danica as a sexual object, not yet anyway, but more of a younger sister. But either way, this was a hard, complicated situation. His body wanted to be next to her, make sure no one hurt her, but his mind told him that she was Tyler's daughter, and having anything to do with her was wrong. He knew she was too young for him, that even when he would want her sexually, when his animal would see her as a sexual object and one that needed to be claimed, she would only be 18 and still too young. He walked over to the Ivandau in the living, stared out at the trees that secluded him, and felt his animal pace beneath his skin. He none out this angry, anxious energy. Lowering his head and closing his eyes, he could have torn his cabin to hell, destroyed everything because he was so angry over how the situation had played out. He had lied to Tyler when he said he didn't want a mate, didn't want a woman for more than a few hours. In truth, he had thought about what it would be like to a female that was only his, that was made especially for him alone. It was a heady and intoxicating realization, but with that came the fact he knew he could never be with another woman again, could never move on in that regard. His body, his mind and heart, and Flack, even his lion were now tied to she was his, and he was hers, yet she knew nothing. The imprinting a shifter went through, wouldn't he understand where he was coming from? He didn't want to leave, didn't want to go away from her. But on top of fact she needed to live her life, graduate high school, and go to college. He knew that he couldn't here. He had to stay away until she experienced things, until she could consciously make the decision to with him, mate with him, and know the gravity of being an imprinted male. Then he had just left Tyler's place, given some shitty reason that he wasn't feeling right, and taken off after just seeing his friend after years of absence. No, this was a bad situation. He tore his clothes away until he stood naked. Looking down at his chest, he ran his fingers over the nasty bullet scar that lined his side. He had a few more on his back and a knife scar on his thigh. He was a mess, a flacking mess. How could he expect Danica to ever look past the beast he really was? He moved over to the front door and opened it partially. Damien felt the change take over him. Everything in him popped, snapped, broke, and realigned. Fur replaced skin, claws over where his nails were, and fangs replaced his flat, human teeth. Then he stood there in his lion form, big, powerful one, and used to term flesh and killing its enemy. He was an animal that only thought the hunt, tracking his prey, and taking control. But even in this primitive thinking body, all he could envision was Danica and how he had probably scared the shit out of her if the alpha act back at Tyler's place. He paced, moved back and forth, felt his hackles rise, his blood pump through his body, and needed to pad over to the front door. He pushed it open the rest of the way, and stepped onto the porch. Closing his eyes and growling out as the sun slashed through the trees, Damien opened his eyes again and looked around the property. The trees surrounded all four sides of the cabin. The freshness of air called out to the wild part of him, and he padded down the steps and onto the ground. He tilted his head back, shook his body, and felt his skin move over his muscles. And Damien off toward the ran past the thick evergreen and blue spruces, heard the small animals scurry away, and growled in pleasure. He needed this, needed the freedom to get this nervous energy out of his blood. The wind moved over his ruffled his mane, and the feeling of the soft earth beneath his paws had the sensation of his nails retracting coming fon _ he stopped when he heard a twig snap in the distance. Lowering himself to the ground, he scanned left then right, inhaled deeply, and caught the scent of deer in the distance. Taking off toward the direction of the animal, he inhaled again, growling low as his need to hunt it down and tear it apart filled moving faster, hitting the ground harder. Damien scented out the deer, saw it in the distance, and stopped, pressing low to the ground. He waited until the animal wasn't looking around, but its ears perked up as it scented the danger in the air. But Damien was the master of stealth, of stillness and silence. He could wait out the animal for as long as it, but then the deer slowly lowered its head to the ground and started grazing again. Damien felt the need to attack fill every part of him, so he didn't hold back anymore. He lunged forward, but the deer sensed him and took off right before Damien could tackle it to the ground. He followed it through the woods, weaving in and out of the trees, and felt the pleasure move off him at the chase. He was the hunter, and he was tracking his prey. He lunged out, front paws outstretched, claws extended, on display, and took the deer down. It might have sated the animal inside of him for the time being, but Damien felt the anxiousness of being imprinted rise up inside of him violently again. He'd leave for 2 years, wait until she was of age, until she could decide what she wanted, but even though he wanted her to be able to decide what she decided, if she wanted him as a mate, he knew that he could not just walk away from her. Telling Tyler that a scarred beast of a lion shiner had imprinted his daughter was going to pretty flacking hard. But Damien couldn't just leave for good, even if that was the right thing to do. He said he'd let Damar be for now, stay away until she could decide what she wanted, but it would be the hardest flacking thing he would ever do in his life. 3-4 years later, present day. Danica watched as Hayden winked at her in terms of his goodbye for the time being, and was all but hauled out of the living and down the hall by some drunken girl intent on getting laid. She smiled though, because seeing Hayden wear this gooey grin on his face because he wasn't the one having to hit on a girl, instead being all but sexually mauled in front of a room full of stoned people, was a highlight of her night. She brought her of water to her mouth and took a long drink. She'd taken a beer when she'd first gotten here, and even if she was ready to leave. She glanced at the hallway again, watched as Hayden disappeared one off doors, and then it slammed shut. She'd just tell him she was ready to go and that she would see him later. Danica sat on the couch, which smelled of spilled beer and cigarette smoke, and looked at her phone for the 5th time in the last half hour. She was supposed to be home in an hour and a half for a dinner with her dad and Damien. She thought about the sea lion shifter, about the last time she'd seen him and the awkward way he had stared at her, as if he had wanted to tell her something monumental, but couldn't. That had been 4 years ago. Even coming home during breaks from school she'd expected to see him in passing, but he'd stayed away. But tonight she'd see him again, maybe even hail the nerve to ask what had happened all of those years ago. To this day it still consumed her when she thought about it, because there was some part of her that felt what had happened them, that non-verbal, intense attraction, meant something powerful. She'd come to this party because Hayden said she needed to let loose. After coming back home after 2 years of school, she knew that starting her life back in the town she grew up in was the right decision. Maybe she should have stayed another 2 years at school, gotten her bachelor's, and then come back, but the job offer to help the intimate advertising for a small law firm in Turin had been too good to pass up. She wasn't making as much as she would have if she had her bachelor's, but for starting out she was pleased with her salary. She already had her own apartment, albeit a small one-bedroom place, but hers nonetheless. She could focus on living her life, and decide on what she wanted out of her future. Staying with her was wonderful, and she loved him, but he was just too overbearing and overprotective at times. But despite the fact she hated being smothered at the age of 20, she couldn't fault her dad over the fact he wanted to keep her close. He'd lost his wife, Even if it was nearly 2 decades ago, she knew having her by his side helped him on a level that made him secure. A pretty girl like you doing here alone? Need some company? The slurred masculine voice coming from her had her rolling her eyes. Of course there had to be someone to a lame pick-up line before the night was over with. She tummed and stared at the guy sitting on the arm of the couch. He was definitely drunk given the stench of booze that came from him, the fact his eyes were half-lidded, glossy and red, and also because he kept leaning to the side and having to write himself "I'm not alone," and "no thank you" on the company. She planned on leaving anyway, and right now seemed as good a time as any. She stood, headed down the hallway to tell Hayden she was heading home. He got too invested in his sex fest, and came to a jarring halt when someone grabbed her arm. She looked over her shoulder, stared at the drunken asshole she, left back at the couch, then lowered her gaze to his hand. "Let go of me. You're drunk, and I will kick you in the balls." Taking Taekwondo for the last 2 years while away from home had been her Atha's idea, but she hadn't fought the suggestion. In fact, she liked being able to learn how to defend. He let go of her arm and took a step back, but he looked at her still, and didn't turn to leave. "You're one of those uppity bitches, aren't you?" He didn't phrase it like a question, and narrowed his eyes as if that statement pissed him off. "Fuck off." She tummed around and headed toward the duvet. Hayden was behind Kill. When she got there she saw the prick had tummed away and was walking back into the living room. "Asshole," Danica said under her breath. Facing the again she banged on the until she heard Hayden murmuring on the other side. He said, then his question was followed by a female giggle and groan. Dama refrained from gagging at the mental image that slammed into her head. "Hayden, I'm going to be going, okay?" He yelled out. "I'm heading home." "I'll talk to you tomorrow," she said louder. This time there was silence on the other end. Then the sound of footsteps coming closer had her move and a step back. The door opened, and Hayden stood on the other side, his shirt off and his jeans unbuttoned. "God," Hayden, Danica said and looked away. Hayden was like a brother to her, and knowing what he was going to do with the slut in the bedroom, and the fact he was half naked, grossed her out. "You're leaving?" "Oh," he asked, seeming like he was truly surprised she wouldn't want to wait out in the living room with a bunch of drunks while he screwed a random chick. "Yeah, I thought staying is probably not the best idea, especially since that asshole there was giving me a hard time after I turned his ass down." She looked over at the prick in question, saw him drinking right out of a scotch bottle, and turned to stare at Hayden again. He was watching at the guy she'd taking, and the irritation on his face was clear. "I have that dinner thing with my dad and his friend in an hour anyway. I'm sorry I left you out there. Brandon is a good guy, and OU.NS this place, but some of his buddies are real motherfuckers." He faced her again. "Let me get dressed and I'll leave with you." "No, I didn't tell you I am leaving. Hopes you leave, too." He shook his head and her from continuing. "You came here because of me, and we were at the same time." Damn, she smiled and nodded. Kill Hayden was one of good guys, and she was lucky to call him her best friend. "Let me get dressed, I have to go to the..." He nodded and looked behind him. Hayden said in a lower voice, "She's been with half the guys here, but I think I was hard up for a little action. Now my dick won't even get hard for her. Much info, seriously." Hayden started chuckling. "Yeah, sorry about that. Gee, me a few minutes." She nodded, and he shut the door. She looked at the asshole again, who was now watching at her, this blank expression on his face. Danica ignored him and went into the bathroom. When the door was shut behind her she glanced at the bathroom and realized a man definitely lived here alone. It was filthy, with a ring of mold around the bathtub, dust in the corners of the floor, and the toilet seat up and showing a collection of film. She didn't even want to try to guess what it was made of. "Peeing can wait until I get home," she said under her breath and turned to the left to look at her reflection. Her light auburn hair was in a low ponytail, and her light brown eyes had these gorgeous dark circles under them. Maybe she shouldn't haul 7 the top and skirt she'd decided on. She wasn't considered a small girl by society's definition, but she lowered every inch of her body. Still, right now she looked a wreck. She lifted her hand and ran a finger along the bridge of her nose, tracing the light sprinkling of freckles on her skin. She hated them when growing up, even tried using lemon juice to lighten them, but she looked just like her mother, and now that she was older she liked all the things she used to hate about herself. She may not remember her mom, but her had told her enough about her mom. Franny he told her stories about how she'd always sung to Danica before bed, and how much she loved her, and Danica felt like she did her mom, who had died too young. The doorknob turned, and before she could say someone was in the bathroom, the door was opening and the douche that had insulted her just a few moments before walked in. "Hey, what in the hell are you doing?" He used his much bigger body to push her further back into the bathroom. The back of her legs into the bathtub, stopping her retreat. "Get the hell out of here, or I swear to God I'll even kick your nuts so up you'll choke on them." He hissed out a curse, and before she knew what was happening he had his hand on her throat, and had her turned so her back was now pressed to the wall. "You stupid hucking cunt Colin," he said in a low voice, his anger clear. She brought her leg up, trying to kick him in the crotch, but even as drunk as he was he blocked her assault, and wedged his knee between her thighs. Lifting his leg up and pressing his knee to her body, she struggled. She should not have worn the skirt, it now gave him this unobstructed access to her. Danica her mouth to scream, but he slapped her across the instant feeling of her lips splitting, and the metallic flavor of her blood in her mouth had her spitting in the flicker's face. "You stupid bits," he hissed out again, and when he used one of his hands to wipe the blood and saliva from his cheek she felt the small gap in his hold that allowed her to use her martial arts training to get the upper hand. Bringing her arm up, she was able to punch him in the throat hard enough that he gasped out and moxed back a step. The bathroom was tiny, and the small confines would make trying to get out of this difficult. She might have 2 years of taekwondo training, but in the grand scheme of things it wasn't enough to make her an expert in the least, especially when this drunken fool outweighed her by at least 50 pounds. She also wasn't stupid, and so while he was trying to suck in air she tummed to leave the bathroom and get out of his hacking house. He grabbed her hair as soon as she had her hand on the doorknob, and yanked her backward. She cried out from the sudden pain and fell into his body. "I'm going to enjoy this, bitch," he said in a low voice right by her ear. She slammed her head back against his, twisted in his arms like she'd iron taught in training, and went to push him back, but before she got to the ladder the door opened and Hayden stood there. "I heard you shout !" Hayden said, but his words trailed off as he looked at her and clearly saw the busted lip she sported. Danica felt the blood drip onto her chin, but just wanted out of here and didn't cleaning it off with her shirt sleeve. Hayden looked at the asshole again, cursed low, and grabbed her arm to haul her out of the bathroom. She thought they would just leave, but Hayden went into the slammed his fist into the other guy's face over and over again until he fell into the bathtub, and only then did he back up. Her best friend breathed hard, acting like he wanted to go after the guy again, but she his hand and pulled him. "Let's just go." Hayden spit on the ground by the asshole's feet. The guy was now half in the bathtub, drunker than hell, bleeding from his nose and mouth, and groaning. "You fricker I should kick your ass until you aren't breathing anymore, thinking you could put your hands on that, or any woman for that matter." He cursed out again, tummed and aced Danica, and said in a low voice, "Let's get the hell out of here." They moved out of the house, and she stared at all the people that were watching them with surprised and interested expressions. The music still pumped through the house, but she just wanted to get the hell out of here and put this experience behind her. Once they were outside and by her car, Hayden breathed out and ran a hand over his hair. "I am so sorry, Dame, it's not your fault, Hayden." She wiped the blood from her lip, evinced at the soreness of it, and watched as he continued to pace in front of her for a few more seconds. He stopped, stared at her, and the defeated look he gave her broke her heart. "Elle brought you to this damn party, and should have never left you alone." She placed a hand on his shoulder and smiled softly at him. "Guys like that motherfucker," she chuckled, and he did the same. She tried to make this situation a little lighter even though she was feeling anything but. Guys like him try shit like that no matter what. You are not responsible for that, I am not responsible for that, and we can't blame ourselves. But that was a lie, because she did feel responsible, felt like if she hadn't stuffed shit with him, threatened to kick in his balls, maybe he would have backed off. Stop thinking that. She pushed her thoughts away, knowing she needed to be strong, to get through this, and that dwelling on it wouldn't help. God, Danica. He pulled her in for a hug, rested his hand on the back of her head, and stroked her hair. Your dad will kill me when he sees your lip. She shook her head, but closed her eyes and stayed right where she was. No, this wasn't your fault, and he knows you never put me in harm's way on purpose. She pulled back. You can't help how an asshole act. He smiled, but it was forced. She pulled away, patted him on the chest, and tipped her chin toward her car. Have to go anyway. I'm meeting up with my dad and his friend dinner. You sure you're okay to drive home? She nodded. Of course. Because I'd feel better driving you there. We can pick up your car tomorrow. She shook her head. He even finished. No, it's okay, really. I am okay. She pushed him gently toward his car parked a few feet away. You're okay to drive? He nodded. I am good. Just text me when you get home so I know you got there okay. I will, and you do the same if I get there before me. He smiled, and this time it was genuine. She watched him get in his car. And then she went over to the S-side and climbed him. After starting the engine, she watched in her rearview mirror as Hayden pulled out of the driveway. But he didn't. He drive away, and she knew he was waiting for her to leave as well. Once she was on the road, driving away from the party and the situation, she felt herself break inside. The tears flowed down her cheeks despite her trying to stop them. Hayden went in another direction and was no longer her. She pulled off to the side of the road, let her tears consume her, and didn't know how in the hell she was going to keep it together when she got to her father's house. For Damien had stayed away for 4 years, 4 long years. To say that was one of the hardest things he has done is an understatement. Danica was his mate, his too young and inexperienced mate. She was also the daughter of his friend, Tyler, and that should have had Damien backing off and realizing that being with her, mate or not, was a bad idea. Tyler was like family, his brother, and mating with his daughter, imprinting on you old complicate things. He should have left for good though, should have just forgotten everything, packed up his shit, and gone our away. That would have the right thing to do, the safe thing, but he couldn't, no matter what was the worst route for everyone. His body was pulled toward her now in a way that wasn't just about taking care of her, protecting her. For the first 2 years he had stayed away, wanted to give her until the age of maturity so she could be told what she was to. He'd traveled the country, visited old military buddies, seen his mother and Arthur, and tried to center himself for his return to claim his mate. But when he'd come back to her it was to find out she'd left for college. There had a sliver of relief that she'd gone and done something with her life. But the bigger part, the imprinted part of his animal, had paced to bring her back, tell her what she was to him, and claim her. When a shiner found their mate it was instant, consuming, and had all other thoughts and needs becoming basic and primal. The shifter was focused only on making sure that the female they had imprinted on was theirs irrevocably. Now she was 20, and he'd been back in town for the last 2 years, staying in his own world, working toward trying to figure out how things would work out with Danica. But he knew from Tyler that she had her associate's degree now, and had a job offer in town. He was outside his truck, pacing back and forth as he counted down the minutes until when he was supposed to head to Tyler's for dinner. He had yet to tell his friend that Danica was his mate. But he was going to tell Tyler and Danica tonight, let them both know that he'd waited for the last years for this, and he wouldn't be denied. He'd knew a force Danica into a mating, but for him there was only her, there would only ever be her. For him his need for her was unbearable, But it helped that she'd been gone, away from where he was. This is it. Don't be an asshole, take this situation nice and slow, and hope if I'll 11 why this won't change everything for the worse. Bracing his hands on the driver's side door of his SUV, he lowered his head and closed his eyes. Yuck, he said in a low voice, feeling like he was to break in two from the anticipation, nerves, and the tension in his body. He pushed away from the SUV, stared up at the sky, and felt his lion move inside of him, impatient, needy, and so territorial at the thought that he was just an hour away from seeing his mate. Calm down, you bastard, Damien said, breathed out, and got into his car. Once he had it started, he sat there for a moment, staring out in front of him, his hands tightly around the steering wheel. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for since he had come back to settle down 4 years ago. The imprinting desire may have started out as only wanting to protect and make sure she was safe, but for the last 2 years it had continued to grow to this blistering need of arousal. Going this long without claiming his mate should have been some kind of record. But the TMTH was he'd knew met another male that had gone through the imprinting. He had heard about it plenty of times, but the men he'd associated with had been SEALs, the same as he was, and they had been focused on fighting. There had been no claiming going on while he had been serving his country, no desire to have a female for more than just a few hours at a time anyway. And since meeting Danica, for the last 4 years, he hadn't been with anyone. Once an imprinted male found his female, he couldn't even get an erection for another woman. But that was how Damien wanted it, because Danica was the only female he'd ever want. 5 Danica pulled her car into the driveway of her dad's house, cut the engine, and looked at the house. She saw the SUV that she assumed was Damien's, and wiped her cheeks again, trying to stem off her anger and hurt after pulling over on the side of the road and crying. She'd forced herself to get back on the road when her tears weren't body-racking. But she still had tears that were a steady flow down her cheeks. Was she in shock, pissed, sad, so disconnected that she didn't know what in the hell was going on? With one more deep breath, she grabbed her purse and opened her car door. Heading up the steps and entering the house, she wanted to just tear down the hallway and lock herself in. Is that you, Danica? She wanted to ask her dad who else would it just walking into the house, but she was in a strange mood and kept her mouth shut. She went down the hall to the bathroom and shut the door behind her. Looking at her reflection had her wincing at the sight. She lifted her hand and lightly touched the scabbing split lip she sported. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her cheeks pink from crying, and all in all she looked a hot mess. After splashing some cold water on her face, and taking one more deep breath, she stared at her reflection again. She would have to explain her ace to her dad, and what made this worse was that his friend was here, and you old witness the whole awkward exchange. Danica didn't want to talk about what happened, not now, and maybe not ever. Her martial arts training hadn't been enough to stop the asshole that forced himself on her, and if not for Hayden this night might have ended very differently. She fixed her hair, putting it in a loose because leaving it down wouldn't conceal her face, and hiding in her room. You'll just have her dad worried more, and making a bigger scene of talking to him. She'd just get this out of the way. Leaving the bathroom and walking down the hallway and into the kitchen, she heard her father sulking to Damien. Just thinking about the lion shifter had her body feeling electrically charged. She couldn't describe the sensations moving through her, or why she had this weird feeling whenever she thought him. She'd only met him that one time 4 years ago, and he probably didn't even really remember her. She rounded the corner and saw her dad leaning against the counter, a beer in his hand, and to Damien, who had his back to her. Her dad started laughing after he told some old war story, and when he realized she was standing there he glanced her way, his smile slightly when he took in her, and then he was cursing and moving toward her. Danica. He went to touch her but she took a step back. Nothing, I'm fine. She looked at Damien who had now turned around, but the way her father was positioned in front of made only half of his face visible to her. She lifted her hand to cover her mouth, and although her father was talking about something right in front of her, it was like all sound left. She stared at Damien. I watched as he came closer, how his pupils dilated, and heard this strange rumbling coming from him. Either she was imagining it all, or he was oblivious to the situation happening right now. In the hell happened, Danica? Her fifth said more this time. She looked at him, didn't want to get into this, and shook her head. I said I'm fine. Did you feel or something, trip and hurt yourself? Her anger and annoyance over the situation, over the fact she didn't want to be here right now talking this, had her lowering her hand and staring at her father. Did I fall or something? She had no right to be upset at her dad, but she was already emotionally unstable, and having his friend witness this sucked. No, Dad, I didn't, but I also don't feel comfortable talking about this right now. Then Damien was standing right beside her father, his gaze on her lip, and this low sound left him. It was threatening, dangerous, and she actually moved back a step. She looked at her. She saw him watching Damien _ his eyebrows knitted as he clearly was surprised by this reaction coming from the other man, too. Flacked with you? Damien said in this low, growly voice, one that sounded more animal than human. What? She felt like she was trapped in this strange dimension where her thought she was just clumsy and injured herself, and where this man she, only met once before had her body on fire, as he demanded who hurt her. Danica. Damien took a small step forward. Tell me who put their hands on you. She saw her father snap his head toward her through the corner of her butt. She couldn't stop staring at Damien. His light blonde hair wasn't cut in that military style like it had been all those years ago, but it was short still, and blushed his forehead _ and his colored eyes were bright, animalistic in quality, and she felt like he could see right into her soul. It was like nothing could be hidden from this man, and it was unnerving. This isn't something I am going to talk about right now, she said on a shaky breath, staring at her Atha, who seemed to be realizing that her split lip might not have been caused by her inability to walk straight. It was not a good idea coming here. She needed to leave, needed to head back to her place because she should have known that she was too tattered emotionally to deal with being around anyone. I had to go. I just have to go. Running away was childish on her part, but she couldn't think straight right now, not when her father and Damien were watching her like they expected her to break down in front of them, and she was too, just burst out in tears because right now she felt so emotionally stripped bare she couldn't even breathe. I'm sorry, she said to both of them, and turned and left her father's house. There would be questions, but she also knew that until she was ready to talk she couldn't give any answers. 6. Damien was doing everything in his power not to go after Danica and demand she tell him who had dared touch her. But he saw the way her eyes had widened after he and the way she had felt that he had gone too fast with her. The scent of fear, anxiety, and inner conflict had slammed into him. A sledgehammer in the hell was that, Tyler asked. He ran a hand over his head and breathed out. His friend was clearly out of his element right now. Danica has never acted like that, and you think someone did that to her lip? Damien hadn't told Tyler what Danica was to him. He had meant to tonight, but then this weird situation had gone cloudy and right now it seemed inappropriate. Don't think she'll say what really happened until she's ready. Of course he scented the TMTH when he asked her who touched her. The truth had been there, right at the surface, but her emotions had been so raw and open that he knew she had on the verge of breaking down. That was the only reason he hadn't pressed her on the issue _ I'm going to go. TMTH was he felt like a bastard, because he was planning to follow Danica and get some answers. She was his mate, and seeing her after years off keeping himself in check had been the hardest thing his lion and human side had tried to suppress. Tyler didn't respond, and the scent of his worry over Danica, and the fact that he was looking like a stressed out filled Damien's nose. She'll okay, Tyler, don't worry. And Damien would make sure of it, because he'd FMD out who the frick had touched her, and he'd beat their ass for hurting his woman. 7 She slammed her front pissed a lot of things. Yes, storming out of there and not letting her father help her had been childish. But she'd been working on emotion, and leaving had seemed like the best thing to do at the moment. She went into the kitchen and placed her hands on the counter. Closing her eyes and breathing out, she thought about how her dad had watched her with concern, and how pissed Damien had been. She remembered the way her had thought she had hurt herself by accident, but then how Damien had gone almost territorial of her but then again he was a shifter, smelled the truth of it all. That didn't explain why he seemed like he wanted to know exactly who had hurt her so he could huff them. It had all been too much, and she had only there for less than half an hour. God, what is happening to me, she said to herself, not exactly sure what she meant by that question, or how to solve it. Then the sound of someone beating on her front door had her spinning around. She moved toward the door, looked through the peephole, and her heart stopped when she saw that it was Damien. Taking a step back, Damien looked at the floor, then glanced at the door handle. She gripped it, turned the brass, and pulled the open. There he stood, looking fierce enough that she saw the way his lion flashed across his face. Danica swallowed, didn't know why she felt this heat fill her, consume every inch of her, or why she wanted to give herself to this man she didn't and he was so close. All she would hail to do was lean in and she could taste him, and experience this wild, primitive side of him. He kept making these low, growly noises, and the sound went straight to her pussy, causing the inner muscles to clench on their own. This is crazy. You are crazy for wanting this, Danica. You don't know him, don't know anything about him aside from what your father told you. But he didn't move from the entrance of her door. The rain had staffed up, and the strands of his hair came soaked, water dripping down his face and saturating his clothes. It became a powerful storm outside within seconds, and she moved aside to allow him in. How did you know where I live? This situation was becoming even stranger, more heated, and having her more aroused than she had ever been in her entire life. I followed you. And my dad didn't think that was weird at all, she said in a low voice, her hands shaking uncontrollably. He didn't answer right away, but did take a step inside and shut the door behind him, sealing them inside. He took another step, closer to her, and her breath stalled. Your father TMSTS me, knows I would never huff anyone he cared about. The water continued to run down his temples, and his white shirt became soaked and transparent. But he doesn't know I followed you, obviously. I don't think your dad you old much like it, especially since I didn't explain everything tonight. She looked at his chest that was revealed, at the tattoos under the material, and the way his hard muscles flexed and clenched, as if he were trying to hold off from just attacking her. I want him to attack me, to just devour every part of me. Danica had no idea where the thought or desire had come from, but it took control, was at the front seat, and she couldn't stop it even if she wanted to. Her cell vibrated in her pocket, and she grabbed it and looked at the screen. Dad, honey, I know you can take care of yourself, and I know I can be pretty damn smothering, but I just want to make sure you're okay. She felt like a bitch right now for just leaving. She may only be 10 minutes from where her Atha lived, but still, she didn't have to freak out like that. I left shortly after you took off knowing your dad wanted to be alone. He took a step closer to her. Before she could respond to Damien or text her father back, she got another text from her dad. Dad, just tell me you got home okay _ I'll talk to you tomorrow, and maybe we can discuss everything that happened. Danica, 12M home and okay, and I'm sorry for running out that. Let's get together tomorrow and talk, okay? She sent the text, knowing that although she was okay, she still wanted to be honest with her dad about what happened tonight at the party. Before she even had her phone in her pocket again, she felt the lightest touches from Damien. She lifted her head, startled that his thumb was on her cheek, right beside her split lip. She could see the play of emotion on his expression, that anger that covered his hard, angular handsome and changed him from a gentle human to a savage shifter. "You'll tell me who did this to you, Danica," he said in this low, rage-seething voice that had a chill racing up her spine. The dominance and demand were clear in his voice, and she knew that she would tell him whatever he wanted. It was this weird pull and tug she felt inside of her, a part of herself that wanted to submit to this man though she didn't know him. She didn't want to talk about it, but for some inexplicable reason she found herself telling him exactly what happened. With each passing second as she retold her story, spoke the assault at the party, in the end of Hayden saving her, she watched the rage morph Damien's face. He let go of her and took a step back. The anger coming from him was intense, so she felt the hairs on her arms stand on end, and felt her heart pump her blood harder and faster through her veins. "His name, Danica?" Damien asked, and she was confused as to why she had this connection with him, and why she felt the need to tell him whatever he wanted. They didn't know each other, and despite Damien being her father's lifelong friend, this whole situation seemed awkward and misplaced. But still she felt the need to answer him. "I don't know his name, but why do you care?" He stopped pacing, looked at her, and before she knew what was happening he was pressed right up against her, his chest to hers, his hand on the back of her head, holding it there securely. "I wanted to tell you so damn badly it all, Danica," she said aloud, not knowing what Eva's gone on, but also not wanting to move away from the hard, muscular, and hot confine of his body. She felt trapped, but in the possible way that should scare the shit out of her, but it didn't. "Tell me about what?" Danica tried to sound stronger, she really did, but her voice came out soft and weak, and so vulnerable. It was exactly how she felt right now. He looked down at her split lip, and this low animalistic sound left him. "If I'd been there I would have killed him for you." "And looking at you, Danica." Damien slowly shifted his gaze to hers once more, and his pupils dilated and contracted as his animal pushed von var. She could see the evil beast in his expression, in the way Damien was clearly trying to keep it at bay. "I don't know what's right now, why I'm feeling this way toward you, and why I can't seem to make sense of it all." She hadn't meant to say any of this, but her emotions felt raw right now. And she needed to feel someone close to her, holding her, and telling her that things weren't as shitty as they always ended up being. "I know, Danica." He lifted his hand and brushed the side of her mouth. She felt the sting of his touch, but also the heat that moved slowly through her, starting in her belly and claiming every part of her. "You're mine though, only mine, and I knew from the moment I saw you 4 years ago." Damien spoke softly, and although she should have been afraid of the seriousness of his words, all she felt was the connection she already had simmering inside of her grow to a blistering level. "Imprinted on you 4 years ago, but it started as my lion waiting to protect you, and nothing more, and then you came into your maturity, and I was intent on having you, claiming you." Danica, his face was so close, his mouth right next to hers. Damien's breath was warm, soft on her face, and she wanted to kiss him. This was ludicrous, but it felt so right. It was crazy right in the intensity of it all. "This is so crazy, Damien." She hadn't meant to say that either, but hell, it seemed when she was around this man she couldn't control herself. "I know it is for you, but for me, Smiss, the moment I saw you, there hasn't been a time I wasn't thinking about this moment." He lowered his gaze back down to her lips. "You're my mate, and my lion wants you, Danica. I want to claim you, but I know as a human this is all very strange and new to you." And when she shifted on her feet, moving slightly back, maybe trying to grapple for leverage, her belly brushed against his body. She almost out at the feel of very big, and very hard, erection he sported. "And I'm sorry about that," he responded, as if he could read her mind, and knew that she was stunned by the size of him. "But my body knows what it wants, and that is you." "This is all so crazy." She licked her lips, felt his chest move with hers every time she breathed, and knew that she oldn't stop this. Danica couldn't. Damien was so much older than she was. She was only 20, and he was 39, but even that wasn't the big issue here. He was her father's friend, and surely being with him, actually allowing herself to experience what this lion shifter was tempting her with, was wrong on some level. Her father might see it as a betrayal, as a sick coupling that went against nature. 4 years ago, when I saw you in the hallway and all I wanted to do was make sure you were safe, I could see the connection you had with me. He's softer this time. Just admit that you feel the pull now, that you want this OFIOU.N free will because you're an adult and can finally feel the sexual chemistry between us. She started breathing heavier, like she couldn't stop herself, couldn't control her own body. Danica was so wet between her thighs, and she felt her nipples harden beneath her shin. Yes, she was a 20-year-old, but even though she may not experienced that way, illicit and dirty images of being under Damien filled her mind. She could picture his big, hard, and muscular body straining over hers, that massive erect long between his legs thrusting in and out of her body. It would huff, that was for sure, but she had a feeling that even if she wasn't her, it still would have felt like he was splitting her in two. She may not be an on-cock size, but God, Damien had to hail broken the mold. That thing. He inhaled deeply, and he closed his eyes for a second as his nostrils flared out slightly. I might not be able to know what you're thinking, but from the desire pouring off of you I can guess, Danica. His eyes, his pupils still contracting and dilating as his lion flashed across his face. I'll push you into anything. I'd never force your hand, but you also have to know, because I'll never lie to you, that I can't walk away. He cupped the side of her face, his fingers strong, warm, and slightly callous. I walked away, gave you the space you deserved and needed, but only you were young. You needed to experience life first, and my sexual desire to claim you didn't until years after I found you. This is making my head spin, she told him honestly. I know, baby. He looked down at her mouth. Christ, I know how hard it is for you. But you're my mate, and neither my lion nor human side will just let you go. I'd walk in the fiery pits of hell just to show you how much I am connected to you. This mating we have, for me, is unbreakable. There was so much truth in his words, so much determination for her to understand what he meant, that Dama's heart stand beating so and hard she grew dizzy from her rising blood pressure. This whole situation was insane, and she felt like she had been dropped into some twisted scene from the Twilight Zone. But despite all of that, right now she couldn't deny that whatever he was talking about, this connection he had with her, she most definitely felt it. Maybe she shouldn't want anyone to touch her after what that asshole had tried to do her back at the party, but honestly she wanted to feel Damien's strong, protective body beside hers. Danica wanted to be able to let herself go, just enjoy the feeling of giving herself freely to someone, and not have to fight to stay on top of the situation. Damien didn't move closer, but he did hold her tightly, stroked her cheek with his thumb, and stared in her eyes. Maybe he waited to see what she would do or say, or maybe he was just as nervous as she was at how this was playing out. No, he isn't nervous. At him, look at how secure he is in his position, in the way he speaks, and the fact he has told you exactly what he wants you. And then something snapped inside of her, and she realized that this night would have her experiencing things she'd only envisioned late at night when she was alone in her bed. She'd also felt something for Damien since the first encounter with him, and at only 16 her body had recognized something in Damien as she stared into his eyes, felt his body heat fill her, surround her even. And she definitely felt something when he had said she was his. Dropping her gaze down to his lips, she wanted desperately to be his, to experience this imprinting that he spoke of. When she glanced back up, she saw that he, too, was staring at her mouth. The expression he held could have been interpreted a million different ways: arousal, anticipation, excitement, and primal need. All of those filtered across his face in rapid succession, and this low growl left him, and he inhaled once more. It may be wrong, may even be inappropriate to want her fifth friend, a man nearly double her age even, but she didn't care right now. She did worry about the repercussions later, after this desire had left her and she could breathe again like he had said. She was an adult, knew what she wanted, and didn't care what the result would. Right now she could only think about having him on top of her, and showing her that things sometimes didn't have to be so messed up. Feeling this strength settle inside of her, Danica leaned in those last couple of inches and pressed her lips to his. He waits for several seconds. Then this low, needy, and animalistic sound left him, and he moved his hand to her hair. He grabbed a chunk of her hair, a firm, yet gentle, hold, and tilted her head back to deepen the kiss. She grew even stronger in her lust for him, at the fact she was really doing this. Danica ran her tongue along the seam of his lips and felt his body grow tenser. His cock seemed to jerk between, and a fresh wave of wetness spilled from her. The deep, male groan he made caused her nipples to tighten to the of Pam. /hen he opened his mouth and their tongues pressed together. She couldn't help the small sound of pleasure that escaped. He tasted so good. Danica tilted her head more and deepened the kiss, loving that he was as gone in this moment as she was. She moved her hand back on the counter to try to get more stability as he probed her mouth. Her fingers brushed along the cup by the edge, and then the sound of glass shattering on the tiled floor penetrated her lust-fogged mind. She wrapped her arms around his neck and moved so that her legs were slightly parted and rubbed along his. Damien tensed and she thought he might pull away or stop, but after a moment he kissed her more feverishly, more forcefully even. Danica hissed out as the cut on her lip stung, and he immediately broke their mouths apart. "Shit, I'm sorry, Danica baby." He smoothed his finger over her cut lip, leaned in and kissed it softly, intimately even. "I want to go slow, but it is really hard now that I have you, and you're so damn receptive to me." She breathed in and out, not feeling her desire lessen, but instead heighten. "Don't even slow and gentle." The sound that came from him had her entire body shaking with her arousal. It was hoarse, scratchy and dominating, and it was all because of her. He placed his mouth on hers again, much more softly this time, but she wasn't having that. They were doing this, and it was going to be over the top and not danced around. She grabbed his hair now on the back of his head and ned the kiss, tongues dueling and breath mingling. They were both like uncontrollable animals trying to get closer, needing more. The kiss was frantic, uninhibited. He moved his hands down her body, and gripped her waist, his big hands curling around her wide hips. He tugged her toward him with a firm motion, and then in one movement had her lifted onto the counter. She spread her legs, allowing him to move forward and fit between them. God, she was really going to do this. Her skin rode up, and the rough denim of his jeans scraped along the sensitive inner flesh of her thighs. It excited her, that made her feel like everything was coming apart inside of her, just crumbling for this man. She tried to move closer to press her breasts even harder against his chest and alleviate some of this ache that settled in the stiff buds. Still kissing her, still thrusting in and out of her mouth the muscle, he pressed his erection HL1 against her pussy. He thrust against her over and over, dry humping her as he groaned against her mouth. He suddenly broke the kiss. They both panted and stared at each other. She may be a virgin, but she wasn't a prude, but had never felt this kind of arousal move through her. Danica. His voice was gravelly and hoarse. "I meant to tell you the imprinting, what you are to me, but things took a different _yeah." She knew he was referring to her leaving her dad's house when she couldn't control her emotions. "Doing this without telling your father is _tong_." She knew he was right, knew that if her father found out he would never look at her the same again, and would probably break ties. Damien. But then again, she didn't know that for sure, didn't know if he'd feel a sense of relief because Damien was surely the only man that mould protect her as fiercely as her dad did. She should have stopped, told him they would talk to her, but she felt like she was losing her mind. She felt like this was right, like there was absolutely nothing wrong with being with him. "I want this, Damien. I want you to my first." That sounded so cliché, but it was the truth. The few guys she had dated had never made her feel a sliver of the arousal she felt right now with Damlen_. It wasn't as if she had been waiting until she was married, but more so she had been waiting until the time had been right. This moment, right here and now, was so right. He rested his forehead on hers, closed his eyes and breathed out 12 a strong male, Danica, but when it comes to you I have no control, no reasoning telling me I should stop this. I just can't because I've waited so thinking long to with you already. He cupped her with his hands, leaned back and said in a fiercely animal voice, you're first, and the only male that will ever know how sweet and good you feel right here. He placed his hand between her thighs. A gasp left her when he applied pressure to her panty-covered pussy. This is mine. Only mine. Danica. Her name came out as a strangled groan from him. Her pussy was saturated, and all she wanted was to let him know that she was so ready for him, that she had never been more ready for something than she was right now. He grabbed her waist again, and before she knew what was happening he had her back on the ground, spun around, and had her belly pressed to the counter now. The formica was warm from when she had sitting on it, but goosebumps popped out along her flesh regardless. Her back was to his chest, and she could feel the defined length of his stiff friction along the crease of her ass. Licking her lips, she looked over her shoulder. She could see the raw desire on his face. I've never wanted anything more than I want this, Damien. She licked her lips and then swallowed. She knew iron so bold in her emotions, in speaking what she wanted. But with Damien she felt like she could be any way she wanted around him. I want you. We can worry about the repercussions later, Damien. We can worry about everything after it is all said and done. Danica didn't know what would happen them after this, and she didn't know exactly what to tell her father either. Damien didn't want this as a one-time thing, that was clear, but did she want more him? He ran his hands up, over the sides of her breasts, and across her abdomen. She had never liked her body, never liked the thickness of her thighs, the slight roll to her belly, or the fact she couldn't seem to get lower than a size 16. God, I love that you're so flicking curvy, love that you have lushness that makes you a woman, and not a skinny little thing. He growled. It gives me something to hold on to while I have my dick in your virgin pussy. His voice was nothing but a distorted sound now, and when she looked over her shoulder again she saw that he wasn't fully human right now. His pupils were completely dilated, and the blackness over the amber-colored irises. She also noticed his canines were elongated, slightly brushing along his bottom lip. You see what you do to me, what you do to my lion, baby. He pressed his dick into her ass again, and she felt how big he was, how long and thick. God, how old that feel inside of her. She couldn't find her voice, and so she nodded to answer his question. He gripped her hips tightly and pulled her fully back against him. As if her ass against his shaft was too much for him, he tummed again after only a second, and lifted her back on the counter. This was like one sexually charged roller coaster ride, one that she didn't want to get off of. They kissed again. His lips slammed down on hers, all the built-up passion and desire they both had. Slowly, he ground his cock against her pussy, teasing her until the words for him to frack her were right on the tip of her tongue. He was a skilled kisser as he moved his tongue along her lips. She knew him would be intense and she didn't care if she begged for it, didn't care at this point if she sounded pathetic and needy. Danica was on the verge of climaxing just from the feel of that jean-clad cock pressing against her. Damien went for the button of his jeans. The sound of his zipper sliding down sent throughout her body. And then he stepped back, his gaze between her legs, his fingers on the edges of his pants. Lowering her gaze she saw the trail of thick blonde hair that disappeared beneath his black underwear. Feeling she reached between her legs and slipped her finger under the edge of her panties. He stared at her pussy, and she could see the way he breathed hard and fast. The air practically slammed in and out of him. Danica knew she was breaking his control. She wanted to tempt him, Wanted to make him as hot as she ever so that he really lost control. This was so not like her, but she was losing her mind with need right now. She pulled the material to the side and exposed her soaked cleft. Her clit throbbed when the air touched it. She was drenched, so wet that as soon as the panties were out of the way she could feel her cream slide down her skin. Her heart was beating so she could hear it fill her ears and feel it pounding against the base of her throat. Never had she been so extreme, never had she tried to be the seductress. She continued to tease him, 1m. How he growled low, and held onto the edge of his jeans hard enough that his knuckles were white. She ran the pad of one of her fingers along the swollen rise of her labia, and nabbed it slowly before pulling it back so he could see her inner lips. Could he see how pink she was? Could he see how engorged her clit was? She could feel the tiny bud pulse and swell from arousal. Just having her fingers so close to it was enough to have her on the verge of having an orgasm. Damien had his pants pushed down his hips in the next second. She felt her eyes widen when she finally got a look at hat had been hidden behind his jeans. His cock was huge, thick and long. The head was flared and bulbous, and already wet from his pre-cum. She licked her lips and heard him groan. The sound had her lifting her gaze to his. He took a step toward her and dropped down on his knees. He pushed her fingers aside so now he was the one holding her panties away from her pussy, and groaned again so flicking hot. I'm going to eat you out, baby, lick all of your cream only to make you get even wetter. Affine var _ she her mouth on a silent cry at the feel of his heated breath along her slit. I'm going to claim your virginity, take your cherry as mine, and make you realize that after I am finished my cock will only the one inside of your sweet pussy again. He then placed his mouth on her pussy, and started licking and sucking at her. Oh God, the force of his mouth between, of his lips moving up and down her pussy lips had her leaning back and bracing her once more on the counter. His slightly scruffy cheeks scraped along her inner thighs. He had one hand on her belly, keeping her stationary. The sound of fabric term pierced her lust-filled thoughts, and she watched as Damien tossed the remnants of her panties to the side. He was an animal between her legs. He licked and sucked, probed and teased her until she murmured his name over and over. He spread her pussy lips apart with his thumbs and sucked her clit in his mouth, and she ground herself on him, needing more friction. Danica needed to get off as badly as she needed to breathe. Her orgasm finally broke free, and the rough, harsh grunts he made had her climax rising. It was intense, crazy good, and she grabbed his hair and tugged at the strands. Damien let go of her clit with a resounding pop, and licked a path down her cleft to spear his tongue in her pussy hole. In and out he probed her body with the muscle, not going as deep as she would like, but far enough into her pussy that she clenched around him. He placed his thumb on her clit, and rubbed the small bud back and forth, prolonging her pleasure. She could feel another intense orgasm approach, and her whole body tightened in response. Come again, baby, give me another one. Make your cream cover my mouth. She was shocked at what he said, but those few words sent pleasure through her like a freight train. The intensity of what was happening had her whole body shaking. Danica closed her eyes and let it wash through her. He gave one last lingering kiss to her inner, dragged a path all the way down her leg, and then stood to face her again. She dropped her gaze to the monster standing stiff from the thatch of dark blonde hair at his groin. He grabbed the root, stroked himself from tip to base, over and over again, and kept his focus on her solely. This drop of pre-cum lined the tip of his dick, and she watched in twisted desire as that droplet to the ground. More cum took its place right away, and he never stopped stroking himself. He clearly had enough of pleasuring himself. He stepped between her legs, ran his hands over her inner thighs, close to her pussy before stopping when he made contact, and slid the pads of his fingers over her belly. He snagged his fingers under the hem of her shirt and slowly pulled it up and over her head. Her bra wasn't anything fancy, just plain white cotton with this little pink bow between the cups, but the way he stared at her chest made her feel like she was wearing the most sexy, revealing lingerie imaginable. Fuck Danica. He ran a hand over his mouth as he stared at her chest. Because she wasn't a thin woman, her breasts were large and round, well more than a handful. The longer he stared at her, the more this flush swept through her whole body. He moved closer to her, and she gasped when she felt the hard, hot length of his erection press against her cleft. Her skirt was pushed up her waist, and the air blushed along her exposed slit. With no panties on, she felt the silkiness of his cock, felt the semen that was still coming out of the tip of his shaft, and curled her fingers against the counter. They stared at each other, neither speaking, but the heat and arousal moving between them with so much force that sweat stand to line the space her breasts. Without waiting to see if he would do it, she reached behind her and undid the clasp of her bra. The material was lying on the counter beside her. The air caused her nipples to become even harder. He stared at her breasts, made this inhuman sound of pleasure, and grabbed the of his cock again. "Damien, I need you. Not here, baby. I'm not having your first time be in the kitchen." He helped her off the counter and pulled his pants up haphazardly before adjusting her skin. Before she could move, he was lifting her in his arms. She felt secure and protected, and right now that was exactly what she needed. Maybe it was weird to doing this with a man she really didn't know, with a man that was so much older than she was and her fifthest friend, but right now she could only picture her and Damien. There were no obstacles between them, no ties or tribulations that awaited. It was just people that really needed to together. "Take me to my Damien, too," she murmured against his mouth, and told him where to go. She had her legs wrapped around his waist and her arms around his neck. Damien strode down her short hallway to the only bedroom in her apartment. When Damien stopped in front of her closed door, all he did was hold her tightly to his body and breathe out heavily. "And you're sure about this?" he asked her softly, but with the same hard edge to his voice as "I'm sure." She reached out and pushed her door open. There was dark, the light from the parking lot spilling through the partially drawn blinds, but Danica could see him well enough. He was watching her, maybe having second thoughts now that they were actually about to do this. But then he stepped inside and shut the door behind them. He set her on her feet. She had no shirt on, but even if she should have been cold, all she felt was heat, white-hot heat. He wore his shirt still, and she wished he would remove it. Lifting her hand, she ran her fingers along his chest, and felt the muscles underneath the damp material flex and contract. Shadows covered his butt. His need for her was evident. He took a step closer, and she moved on back until she was resting against her hands were flat on the wood, her skin flushed, sweaty, and her pussy ready for him. He slowly moved his hands down her arms, gripped her skirt, and pulled the material down. Here she totally nude in front of this lion shifter, and all she could think of was filthy things she had never experienced before. She didn't go his pants or try to remove them. Danica would let him do it. But Damien didn't make her wait, and when the pants were off and tossed aside, he went for his shin. Once he was totally nude, she stared at his chest, at the hard ridges of his muscles, his six-pack and pectoral definition, and she dug her nails into the mood. She was getting even more turned on at the sight of him. He was big, at least a foot taller than her 5'5" height, and the power under his flesh was so impressive it made her feel weak in comparison. Danica moved from var and pressed her body to his, rose on her toes, and kissed him hard. His erection jerked, and she felt wetness slide over her belly. He took control of the kiss and brought his hands down to cup her ass. Damien squeezed the mounds and pulled her more forcibly toward him. A soft moan left her, and she opened her mouth wider for his probing tongue. They molded as one toward the never breaking the kiss. She felt the mattress hit the back of her legs and let gravity and his body take her down. Danica arched her back, thrusting her breasts out and against his hard chest. And then Damien latched his mouth onto one stiff nipple. Oh, God! Yes, just like that, his mouth on her nipple, sucking, drawing the blood to the drove her crazy. He used his teeth to tug at the engorged flesh until it on painful _ she speared her hands through his hair again and pulled him closer. He alternated her breasts, sucking one nipple into his mouth then going to the other. When he finally broke away from her, he leaned back on his haunches. Damien placed his hands on her inner thighs, so close to her pussy she could feel the tips of his thumbs tease her lips. "I can't help myself when I'm around you, can't control myself, Danica." He covered her body with his and sucked her bottom lip into his mouth. "My lion is a selfish bastard, wants you for himself, but I am about to lose this war." The thick head of his cock pressed against her pussy _ the tips of his canines were elongated and sharp enough that one of them sliced into her tongue. She tasted the metallic of blood, but it only seemed to heighten her arousal. He ran his tongue along the small cut, moaning, healing her the simple act. She lifted her hips and begged him silently for more. He was gentle with the way he kissed and licked at her lips, paying special attention to her split lip from earlier, and murmuring how he would never let anyone hurt her again. He reached between their bodies, and leaned back enough that she could see what he was doing. He placed the tip of his cock at her entrance, her breath stalled, her heart raced, and she gripped the sheets on the side beside her. Staring at her, he gently started to push into her. Damien was so big, so thick that felt him stretching her, filling her. The pain was there, but the agonizing arousal far outweighed it. And then he pushed right into her in one swift move, keeping his gaze locked on hers the entire time. For a moment all he did was stay buried inside of her, his cock so big that the burning sensation of having something so large inside of her virgin body was monumental. And then he gently pulled back out. He pushed back in another, repeated the process over and over again, and when he looked down at where they were connected, this strangled grunt left him. "Watch as I claim you," he said, and looked back at her. She rose on her elbows and looked down the length of her body. The sight of her blood and arousal along his bare cock had her throat tightening. She wasn't her anymore, and the sensation moving through her that this man, the one that spoke so passionately of her being his, was the one to take it, had the pleasure rising to a volcanic lay. 7E1 She lifted her hips to take more of him, as if this wanton sensation claimed her, took control, and she was now the one, the little seductress. The movement caused him to slide into her, her wetness and his hardness making it easy and smooth. He swore under his breath, "God, baby." He groaned once before he reared back and gripped her hips tight. With one swift move he buried himself to the hilt inside of her again, so forcefully that she moved up an mch on the bed. The feeling of his balls slapping against her ass didn't distract her from he was growling like an animal, saying lewd and coarse things, and demanding that she admit she was his. "Say you re mine, Danica, and tell me that there is no one else that will have you, touch you, even fucking think about being with you." His voice was distorted and low, very animal ilk in quality. He pushed and pulled in and out of her body, and harder with each passing second. She wasn't thinking clearly, didn't even want to think about anything else than obeying what he said. "I'm yours. No one will ever have me but you." Those words were deep, cemented, and so focused on what they were doing that she had no doubt that, to him, what she said was the absolute TMTH. Danica, her arms around him, leaned up, and pressed her lips to his. She should hail worried Alkiut that they weren't using a condom, about how there is the risk of disease and pregnancy, but as if he read her mind he pulled back and breathed out heavily. "This is good, baby, so fucking no worries on going raw, Danica." He stared into her eyes. "TM clean, and you're not fertile right now." The way he said that and then inhaled deeply sent this flash of electricity through her. "But when the time is right I'm going to fill you my cum. I'm going to fill you up so much it slides out of you and soaks the mattress." He slammed into her harder, and she felt her orgasm start to rise. "I am going to put my baby inside of you, make you big and round with my child and huck you'll wear it so well." He was going so fast now, pumping in and out of her so that he was sweaty, and the droplets covered her flesh. But that is for the HLC_ right now I am taking this cherry as mine. And as if his words had her exploding in blind light, she arched her back and cried out another orgasm. But before he came, Damien pulled his CUK from her and flipped her onto her belly. He placed a pillow under her hips and lined her ass _ She felt his warm, humid breath on her lower back, his claws on her flesh without penetrating her skin. He pulled her legs apart, smoothed his hands down her outer thighs, and leaned over her to whisper in her ear. "I'm not hurting you, am I, baby?" She shook her head and knew that if she admitted there was a little bit of pain he'd stop this. She didn't know how she realized that, but she knew that with every part of her. As if that was all he needed to hear, he lifted off her back, placed the tip of his dick at her entrance and in one swift motion slid back into her. Damien into her like a madman, holding her hips so tight she knew there would be bruises in the morning _ but for some reason she liked that, needed to see his brand on her flesh to know this really happened. The sound of wet sex, of her pussy sucking at his cock, drove her to the brink of madness, and she came hard again. God, she had just gotten off repeatedly, and all because she was lost for this man. Wet flesh slapped together and filled her ears. When she heard him groan out, deep and long, she knew he was about to orgasm. He covered her back with his chest, pushed her hair off her neck, and licked and gently bit at the skin where her throat and shoulder met. "I have to mark you, Hale, to put my physical claim on you and show everyone that you're mine." His words were heated and moist on her skin. She licked her lips. "Just want to be with you." Had she had really said that, let the words past her lips and meant them? He growled low, gripped her hips until his claws dug into her flesh, and then pierced her flesh. The sting of pain was intense, and the warm feel of her blood spilling down her shoulder pierced her arousal for a moment, but the heady rush of pleasure that came after that stole her sanity, and had her body shaking. She couldn't catch her breath, couldn't think as agony and ecstasy became one. His cock gave small jerks inside of her as he finished coming, and when he pulled his canines out of her flesh, and his cock out of her pussy, his semen slipped down her inner thighs collapsing on her belly. Hilly, she breathed against the pillow, and sensed Damien move her. He lay down, and before she could move he had the pillow out from under her, his arm around her waist, and her body pressed to his. "I told you that you were mine, and I will do everything in my power to ensure that nothing changes, that I'll even find out who huffed you, one way or another, and I'll make them pay." She didn't argue, couldn't even move. Danica fell asleep that way, knowing that what this man said was the end, that he truly would do everything in his power to make sure she would always be his. That should frighten her, but for some reason it didn't. Danica's heart was beating fast, her palms were sweating, and she knew that what was allowed to discuss right now would cause a hell of a lot of trouble among Damien, Tyler, and her. She had been with Damien sexually just days ago, given him her, and hadn't regretted 1 second of it. In fact, it was like they had grown closer of that moment, that her body and MMD were now attuned to everything that was Damien. It was the strangest feeling to just think about him, and her body got ready for his cock, for his mouth and hands, and for his possessive and growly attitude. This was fast, and at times made no sense, but for whatever reason she felt that it was right. Over the last 2 days she and Damien had spoken this, and she knew that although she didn't the same hardcore feelings told him like he had for her, she also wanted to be with him. She always felt this intensity when she thought him, and it had all started 4 years ago when she didn't even have the first sense of what was happening. "She's my mate, Tyler." They'd been sitting in her father's living room for the last 20 minutes, but her dad knew they were come over, that they had something to say. Her father stared at Damien, his hands tightly fisted at his side, and his jaw clenched tight. "And that means what?" Damien looked at her for a second. "It means I are imprinted on her. She's my mate, and I can't walk away from her." Her father breathed out roughly and paced. The anger that came from him was tangible, and although she didn't want anyone to upset over this, she also knew that this needed to be brought up. Then her father stopped and pierced Damien with an icy stare. "How far has it gone?" her father said in a low, menacing voice. Damien sat on the couch, his posture non-threatening and calm. "One knew when she was 16, when I first met her, that she was mine." Her let out this deadly sound, one that she had never heard from him before. She knew he was a seal, skilled in killing men his bare hands, but around her he had always iron, gentle and soft-spoken. But right now he looked at Damien like he wanted to kill him. "You were seeing her when she was only 16 years old, her father all but roared out. "God no, Dad, we didn't even talk until 2 days ago, when he explained it all to me." Danica was the one that answered. Her dad glanced at her, this chilled expression on his face. She knew it wasn't for her, though you know enough a shifter that when they find their mates it is an unbreakable. "I don't know the logistics of all of that, Danian, and you know that." Her dad ran a hand over his head and cursed low, seemingly all at the same time. "She's mine, Tyler, and you know that I'll protect her with my life." Her dad held his hand out, his finger pointed at Damien, and clenched his jaw. "Don't talk to me protecting her. I don't even want to know what in the hell happened you two, and how you took advantage of me, little girl." "He didn't take advantage of me, Dad." Zed, he glanced at her, the chilled expression on her dad's now directed at her. "Danica, sweetheart, please stay out of." He tummed and looked at Damien again, but this time the lion shifter was standing. "I trusted you. You two may not have known each other, but you're like a brother to me, Damien. I trusted you to treat her too." Damien a step forward. "She means more to me than Tyler." Her dad his head and ran a hand through his hair. "I realized I imprinted on her 4 years ago. I went away. I left, knowing she was young, even though my desire for her wasn't sexual in any sense yet. I saw her as someone I wanted to protect, watch over, and keep safe." Damien almost sounded defeated. "You know I went away, and when I came back 2 years ago, thinking I'd be able to claim her as my mate, she was gone." Her father cursed out. "I stayed away still, for another 2 freaking years. I knew she needed to be by herself, to live her life. She came back, I'd let her decide how she wanted to proceed." Now it was Damien's turn to run his hand through his hair. "Obviously shit didn't go as I planned, and I'm sorry to spring this on you, but I didn't think waiting and prolonging telling you was the best option." Danica, she could have told her father about this. She had slept with Damien, but she had needed to with him right then and there, needed his comfort. She was an adult, knew that she could make her own decisions without letting her father know, but she also knew that telling him about this since Damien was his friend should have been a priority. "I want to take care of her, Tyler, and I want your blessing." Her father's face turned a nasty shade of red, and he took a menacing step toward Damien. She stood, knowing there would a fight if things escalated. "No, Danica," her father said and lifted a hand to stop her from coming closer. "This is me and Damien. This concerns me." "He's right, stay back, I don't want you getting hurt." Damien was the one to keep her back now. "You're too old for her, Damien." Her dad's jaw clenched, and she heard him grind his teeth. "Don't want to even think what you are doing." He tummed away, gripped the hair at the base of his neck, and pulled on the strands. "You know the age thing isn't a factor. You were a decade older than, too. You don't bring my dead wife into this." Damien didn't say anything else for several moments. "I would never let anything or anyone hurt her. You have to know I'll protect her at all costs." And that seemed to her father's breaking point. He charged after Damien, and she watched in horror as the lion shifter just stood there, as if expecting to be attacked by her father. "Please, Dad, stop." But her words fell on deaf ears. The momentum of her charging Fonvar had Damien and him slamming into the couch and toppling the piece of furniture. The first punch from her father hit Damien in the gut, And then he was hit for a second time on the other side. The only thing Damien did was block the punches, because it was clear he wouldn't fight back. You freaking asshole, I trusted you. Her hit him again and again, until blood came out of his nose and the corner of Moa. She charged forward, tried to pull her dad off of him, but it was like moving a brick. Don't get Danica, Damien said in a gruff voice. They fell to the floor with her father on top of Damien. Knowing this had to stop, she pushed her dad off of Damien with a strength she didn't know she had. Stop, she pleaded, and held herself in front of Damien. Please, he didn't do anything I didn't want. I'm not saying we are in love and will elope. I'm just asking you to try and accept this, Dad. She stared into her eyes. Please. I deserved everything you gave me. Her stared at her, sat on the floor, and breathed out as if he were GLVMG up. He looked at Damien. You deserve a lot hacking more, Damien. I do. DSM.7 EA royal ass beating, worse than what you just gave to me. I didn't tell you sooner, but you are like my brother, and the internal war I had with Miss Ilfova, this had me fracked in the head. She stared at Damien as he spoke to her father. It was hard seeing the man she had this unexplainable connection with fighting with the man that raised her and loved her unconditionally. She might not know what in the hell this imprinting or mating thing really was besides what Damien had told her, but she did know she wanted to explore it more. Her father didn't speak for several seconds. He stared at the floor, as if in deep thought, and having his own internal war raging inside of him. Damien was on the floor now, too, and the three of them sat there in silence. Dad, I don't want anyone fighting of this, but I also want you to know that I want to see where this thing with Damien goes. She looked at the shifter, feeling all kinds of confused because she knew this man meant it when he said he wouldn't walk away from her. She also felt excitement at the possibilities that this was her future, and also a little bit of fear of the latter. I don't blame you for being pissed at me, or deciding that you can no longer friends with me because I betrayed you. She wanted to tell Damien that although they did sleep together without telling her Atha, there wasn't a betrayal. He had 4 years ago let her have time to grow up and decide what she wanted. Even if telling her dad should have been what they did right away, they were adults, and she didn't need permission, even if she did want his acceptance. But I've to tell you and will over and over until both of you know what mating is for my kind, and how unbreakable the imprinting really is. Damien paused for a moment, stared at her as if he wanted her to know that she was everything to him without actually saying those exact words. He ran the back of his arm over his mouth, looked at the blood that covered his shirt, and exhaled. I meant it when I said I'd protect her with my life, Tyler. I'll die for her. She held her breath as she stared at her father, waiting to see what his reaction would be now that he seemed a little calmer. He stared at this hard, intense look on his face, and then sighed heavily. Enough she knew he had relented his anger. I know how the imprinting bond works, Damien Colin, her said slowly, softly. And I know how unbreakable it is for shifters when they find their mate. Her dad looked at her. She's young, so young, and hasn't experienced life yet. Her throat clogged up at the words her father said, and the sadness that was reflected back at her. I don't want to smother her, or stop her from experiencing things, Tyler. I just want to be part of her life, make sure she is safe, and give her she needs to be happy. God, she could have cried at the emotion that was coming from her as she heard Ivat her father and Damien said. Shit, her dad said under his breath. Even though this is pretty flicked up, I do know that if I had to pick one person to take care of my daughter, it would you, Damien. She stared at her dad, saw the way he looked at the other man, and knew that although her father might not okay with this right now, he was going to let her decide how she wanted to her life. Shit, damn Len _ her dad stood, looked him over a few times, and then shook his head. You to treat her well because she's all I have in this world. Damien slowly, and she followed suit. She's my priority, Tyler. Her dad nodded and sighed heavily. If you hurt her I'll even freak you up so you won't come out of it standing, lifelong friendship or not. Although Damien was a shifter, and could tear any human apart with no effort, Damien smiled at her father's words, and nodded. Understood, but there isn't anything to worry about, because I'd rather kill myself than hun my mate. Come here, sweetheart, her father said and pulled her into a hug before she could move toward him. You sure you want this? He asked her in a soft voice by her ear. Dad, I don't know what I want in my life really, but what I do know is that Damien makes me feel __. She thought about how she could even describe the things she felt for this shifter, the connection and complete unity that her body when she even just thought about him. It just feels right, Dad. He pulled back and cupped her cheeks, scared into her eyes, and she waited to see how he would respond. Il may not like this for various reasons, but I want you happy. If Damien makes you happy, then that is the only thing I can hope for. He pulled her in for another hug, stroked her head with his hand, and she stared at Damien over the side of her dad's arm. He wasn't moving, not smiling, just watching her with this concentration that told her he never missed a thing. This was her life now. Her father supported her, and she knew that as long as she opened herself up to the possibilities she'd be able to accept anything that Evers presented to her, even being mated to a hard-ass fierce lion shifter. 10 Damien stared at the text message he just received. Yesterday he had sent an inquiry to a man he knew in private investigations. Ilman, he told Danica that he'd find out who had done this to her. He had meant it. He had no name to go on, but he had gotten Danica to tell him a physical description, where the party had, and the rest he could have his guy figure out. Boris was a skilled tracker, had Ivith the shifter operative trackers for the last 20 years to get the of dangerous men. Compared to the shit Boris had done on the battlefield for their government and kind, this was child's play. It was dark, and Damien sat in his rickle in front of the party this motherfucker was supposed to be. He stared at the guy's name again, Robert Mitchell. Damien's blood boiled at the sound of his name playing out in his head. He was seconds from shifting, so close to losing control that it was taking all of his willpower to hold his animal back. Then he saw that he was about to come out of the house. He staggered across the front lawn, his drunken focus on his car keys. Damien got out of the car and started following the punk as he made his way away from the party to his car that was parked in a secluded back alley. Robert dropped his car keys, he cursed, and Damien felt his claws lengthen farther as the images of what had Iron done to Damar flashed through his mind. Once they were in the alley he curled his nails into his palms and breathed out. You flacked with what was mine, Damien said in a low voice, seething with anger and ready to shift and kill this asshole. Robert slowly turned around, blinked a few times, then curled his lip. He was either thinking stupid for not showing any fear in the ace of a shifter, or too drunk to realize what in the hell he was up against. IAACKED, what was yours, slurred out, and turned his head to spit. Get the freak out of here with that shit. I take what I want when I want, no matter what it is. Maybe Damien should have felt some kind of control over himself because this dick was drunk, but he didn't and still planned on kicking his ass to teach him a lesson. He took a step closer, and Robert shook his head. You're a ballsy asshole _ I Evers varsity football in high school. Damien could have laughed at that. The kid couldn't be much older than Danica, but he was big with an athletic body. It'd help him now, because he would the victim in this scenario. You tried to take something from my woman at a party, pressed her up against a bathroom wall, and you got your ass handed to you even then. Robert looked like he was thulking, and then he started laughing. Oh yeah, that bitch was uppity as hell. Robert charged forward and slammed his body into Damien's, or as much as he could given his pathetic human strength. Damien the force and moved with it, so it was on Robert now. The other male stumbled back, but came von var again swinging. His actions were slow and sloppy, a result of him drinking all night and his anger _ Damien brought his fist up, Clipping Robert under the chin, he stumbled back again, blood immediately spilling from his mouth. Damien could have easily taken this flicker out without even blinking, but this was more. Turned his head and spit out a mouthful of blood. Damien was pumped with adrenaline and endorphins, and his lion wanted out. It snapped and growled, clawing to be released. The fight was half the Huns, half rush. Damien sensed a few close by, but he didn't pay them any attention. The shadows claimed most off alleyway, and he wasn't about to stop this because there were people watching. Robert had a crazed expression on his face, but something inside of Damien snapped, and his lion pushed Fonvara even more. He wrapped his hand around Robert's neck and growled, hoping to have the little asshole piss himself. You flacked with my mate, my woman. You dared to lay a hand on her and think you could take something from her. They shouldn't hear yours. He slammed his fist harder and into Robert's ace _you lion shifting flacker _ He slammed his knuckles into Robert's, heard the bone break and felt the blood spray on his neck. I don't want to even think all of the females you have taken advantage of, but this will be your last time. Damien tossed him across the cement. Tried to get up, but he was bloody, had broken bones, and his strength was gone. He felt no sympathy for the man that thought hurting a woman made him superior. Damien walked over to him, and said in a low voice only he could hear, if you even think my woman again, or I find out you did this to any other female, I'll hunt you down and kill you. He kicked hard enough that his body skidded across the pavement. Damien turned, kept to the shadows, and saw a man and woman stop to see what was going on. They couldn't see him, and he doubted they could see the bastard on the floor either, not unless they wanted to come deeper into the shadows. He left and headed back home. He needed to shift and run this extra energy out of his body, because right now he was so dangerous he eggs and scared himself. 11 good, hey do, she said without any interest in the asshole that had attacked her at the park just 7 days ago was now lying in the hospital because someone had kicked his ass _ he probably deserved what he got. Danica, the guy is near death lying in a hospital bed, Hayden said through and you and I know you don't think violence solves anything. I doubt he is near death. She braced the phone her shoulder and ear, and stuffed a change of clothes into her backpack. She was heading over to Damien's after arc, and although it had only been a week since he had told her what she was to him, and even less than that since they had told her fifth, things were going as smoothly as if it was always meant to go this way. She stopped what she was doing and thought what Hayden was telling her. So someone beat the shit out of the asshole that attacked me at the party, she stated without forming it as a question. And why would I care, Hayden? The guy probably pissed off someone's boyfriend. Serves his ass right. I don't think you understanding what I'm saying. She knew exactly what Hayden was saying, and she didn't care one bit that the prick was lying in a hospital room. Rat to hell. Understand Kel, I just don't care because the guy was a royal asshole _ a witness said it was a shifter that him up. That had everything in stilling. A shifter. Yeah, a lion shifter more accurately, and one that kept talking, never putting a hand on his mate again, or he'd make sure the guy was buried in the ground where no one would find. She had spoken to Hayden Damien, nothing in depth, but enough that her friend knew Damien was her mate, pretty hardcore when it came to the mate thing, and that for the first time in her life she felt like she belonged somewhere with a man. You think it was Damien? I don't know, because I don't really know the guy. But I would it was given the fact you're his mate, he is a lion shifter, and the guy that just happened to get beat up was the one that finked with you last week. Yeah, she knew it was Damien, even if no names had been said. He had already said he'd hurt anyone that touched her, that he'd find out who had messed with her. He delivered on that promise, but Hayden was right, she didn't want violence. Answering violence 111 talk to you later, Hayden. She hung up the phone and stood there for a moment just thinking what was going on. Did she care that asshole was in the hospital? No, not at all, but the fact she was the cause of it didn't sit well with the _ maybe she contradicted herself because she had told Hayden she didn't care that someone had kicked his ass, and now she wanted to talk to Damien it. But she wanted him to know she wasn't cute to have a relationship where he used force to make it known she wasn't to be messed with. Unfortunately she would hail to I-8 until Aina work, and this was going to the longest day of her life. She hoped Damien could understand where she was coming because it was early in their relationship, and she wanted everything out in the open for Ofthem. 12 Danica had planned on seeing Damien after work anyway after she spoke to Hayden about that asshole that attacked her in the bathroom, and how he was now in the hospital. She had to speak to Damien herself, just knowing that he might have though. One to hurt that prick had her this jittery mess. It wasn't that she didn't think the man deserved it, but that Damien had been the one to deliver that beat down. He had told her that he was going to take care of whoever hurt her, that he'd find out one way or another who the guy was that harmed her. She hadn't thought much it, because she hadn't known the man's name, but now she stared at Damien as he stood in the doorway of his cabin. The fierceness and determination that covered his handsome, rugged face showed her he would never stop until he had delivered on that promise. She wanted to just ask him, even though she knew without a doubt he'd been the one to go after the asshole. And although she'd never been one for confrontation, she also wanted to make some things clear with Damien. We need to talk, Zed, she said, and walked into his home. His cabin was gorgeous, although small, but it was intimate, and she knew for what Damien wanted, solitude and isolation. It fit the job. I can smell that you're upset, he said without a hint of worry or anger in his voice. He shut the door, and she turned and faced him. What's wrong? He crossed his big arms over his chest, and for a second all she could do was stare at the way his shirt tightened around his biceps and chest, outlining his muscles. He was quite the male, but she couldn't allow her libido or emotions get the off her right now. Did you go after that guy that attacked me back at the party last week? She wasn't angry in the sense she was going to bitch at him, or scold him for beating up a guy that was so much younger and weaker than he was. The TMTH was a part of her liked the fact someone had invented to avenge her. She'd been huff. She felt this warmth at the idea that he had invented to find out who had touched her, and teach them a lesson on the repercussions of touching what was she'd never been in a situation like this, in a relationship that was all-consuming. Yes, he said with no emotion in his voice at all. He moved away from the door and walked over to the kitchen to grab 2 glasses from the cupboard, and a bottle of whiskey. After he poured both shot glasses, he held one out to her. No, thanks. She watched as he tossed shots back, while staring at her the entire time. If you want me to feel sorry beating that punk's ass, I won't, Danica. He placed his hands on the counter, and this rough note in his voice told her that he felt no remorse over his actions. And I'd do it again. Anyone that thought they could put their hands on you. She shook her head, set her purse on the and breathed out. Listen, Damien, this is all so new to me. I'm still trying to get my head wrapped around the idea that I'm your mate, and that this is a lifelong journey we are going on together. He didn't move, didn't speak, but his amber-colored gaze held hers as if he had his arms wrapped tightly around her, causing her to be immobile. I understand that shifters are more animal than human, and that you want to protect me. IQ never had anyone, besides my father, want to make sure I'm safe like you do. I don't think you truly understand how much I am more animal than Danica. He moved around the counter and walked up to her. She had to crane her neck back slightly just to see into his face. He was upset, but she could feel, that it wasn't directed at her. I know you're angry with me for being physical and hurting that asshole, but he put his hands on you, and thought he could take something from you that wasn't offered. That last part came out of him on a growl. I don't want anyone getting huff. You want to exact vengeance for me, Damien? She lifted her hand and placed it in his chest. The steady beat of his heart was right below her palm. Don't want violence because of violence, Damien, and I'm sure you have seen enough of that in your life. She 6k softer this time. I want to be here with you, to work this relationship out and experience it all with you. He stared in her eyes, lifted his hand and her cheek, and she felt this ZMG go through her entire Don't want you upset with me, Danica, and I understand what you're saying. I want you to be happy. Rising on her toes, she pressed her lips to his, knowing that although he said he understood, that his animal genetics might make it very difficult for him to refrain from using his strength, he lifted his other arm and tapped it around her waist, pulling her close to him. The feel of his erection prodding her had a flash of wetness leaving her pussy. God, even when she meant to come over here just to talk this out with him, all she could think about right now was taking their clothes off and letting him control her body. "I'd do anything for you, Danica," he said against her lips. "TD do anything for you, and if I want me to try and refrain from going after someone that hurt you." He pulled back slightly and stared into her eyes for several seconds. 111 try, baby, but you have to know that you're my mate, and when it concerns your safety my animal is the one that is taking control. He went back to kissing her, harder this time, and slid his hand that cupped her cheek to the back of her head. He held her face close to his as he hugged her with his lips and tongue. "Damien." Her eyes fluttered closed when he moved his mouth to her neck, and his warm breath teased the skin right below her ear. "Yeah, baby." His voice was low, husky, and she swore she smelled his lion pheromones. She breathed out on a moan when he ran his slightly elongated canines on her throat. "You're mine," he growled, and she heard the lion in his voice right then. The feel of his tongue on her throat had a small mule leaving her. "I won't ever take anything you're not willing to give." Her head was suddenly too heavy for her to hold up, and so she let it fall back, baring her throat for her mate even more. "That's it, surrender to me willingly, and I swear to God, baby, I'll make you never regret it." She didn't regret it, would never think twice about giving herself to Danian. Danica wanted to let go, so she brought her hands up, gripped his massive biceps and nodded her desire for him to continue. "I want you, want this, but..." He lifted his head and looked down at her. "Tell me what you want, and it's yours." She licked her lips, knowing that she really did want this, but for this first time it had to be her way. "Will you let me lead?" She didn't need to elaborate, because by the sound he let out she knew he understood. "Anything, baby. Anything and everything I have is yours." He brushed his lips against hers, like he was ready to let her take the reins. She knew it was probably for this one time. Damien was a very dominating man, and she liked that he took control. It made her feel like a woman, and that he knew how to make her feel good. He knew her so well. He took a step back, and for a moment all they did was stare at each other. The shirt he wore was a button-down _ and so she lifted her hands to his chest, and rested her open palm right his pectoral muscles. Her hands shook slightly, but it wasn't from apprehension, but liquid arousal. Danica slipped the buttons out one at a time, and when the material was hanging open she smoothed her hands along the hard, smooth ridges that were clear through his white undershirt. His chest rose and fell, his breathing increasing with each passing moment. Pushing the shirt off his shoulders, she started to leafy the hem of his tee, seeing the ripped six-pack that was revealed, and the dark blonde hair that started right below his belly button and beneath his jeans. How had she gone from wanting to have an in-depth conversation with him to being wet and ready for him to take her? In one if move he lifted his arms over his head, gripped the back of his shirt, and pulled it over his head and tossed it aside. All other thoughts left Danica's mind, and she breathed out roughly when she saw his hard chest. It was wide, golden in color, and so muscular she felt like a small, insignificant female beside him. Even though she had seen him naked, her emotions had iron so raw at the time that a lot of it was just sensations and feelings inside of her. He growled low in his throat. She knew it must be hard for him to just stand there, not taking control when she knew he wanted to. Nemesis was a living entity inside of her, but she pushed it aside and reached for the ult at his waist. His erection was already tenting his jeans, and it was enormous. After getting the button undone and his zipper cloud.n she a deep breath, gripped the edges off denim, and pushed them down. He wore no underwear, a fact that turned her on even more. His shaft sprang forth another limb, and all she could do was stare at it. "You see what you do at me, baby?" His voice was so low, so rough, that her nipples instantly hardened and her pussy swelled with her arousal. You whore total control over me, Danica, you'll always have this control over me. His gaze was lowered to her chest that was risen and falling from her rapid breathing. Touch me, Danica, before I lose my control and just take you right here and now without giving you the chance to take the lead, baby. Keeping hold of his gaze with hers, she reached out and smoothed her hands over his chest again slowly moving her hands down the granite-like, hairless, and hard expanse of flesh. She gripped his shaft without waiting for her nerves to come back to reality. He was so thick and long that she couldn't wrap her fingers fully around his girth. Yeah, Danica, that's it. She wanted him, wanted to feel Damien touch every part of her. Power surged through her when she started stroking him and he couldn't hold his eyes open any longer. She couldn't seem to get enough oxygen into her lungs had her feeling lightheaded. She wanted it all, and she wanted it with this lion shifter. Letting go of his erection and taking a step back, she watched the different emotions pass across his face. Take me, Damien. She didn't finish that sentence, because this low, animalistic growl left him, and then he had her in his arms. He kissed her like he couldn't get enough. He molded her so her back met the hard wood of the living room wall. Damien ran his teeth up and down her neck, and had his hands on her upper arms, holding her in place for him. I could devour you right now, she breathed out at his erotic words. He moved his other hand down her waist, over her outer thigh, and snaked it around until he could grip her behind the knee. You own me, Danica, 01.vn every part of me body and soul. He licked at her pulse. You are the only one that can bring me to my knees. When he lifted her leg and brought it flush his hip, it put her pussy in direct contact with his erection. Damien thrust his hips forward, and she groaned as his CKRK pressed against her clit. The skin she wore had him in direct contact with her panty-covered pussy. Sparks of pleasure went straight through off her body. He did it again and again until she stand grinding herself on him, seeking more pressure. If kept it up she would get off from this alone. He kept moving against her, bringing her pleasure higher and higher until she was gasping air. Yuck, baby. God, Damien. Curling her hands farther into his arms she started moving her hips in time with his, but harder this time, bringing herself closer to her climax. She wished her panties weren't in the way, and that she could feel how smooth and hot he was against her bare flesh. Her head fell against the wall, and a moan spilled from her right when he thrust especially hard against her. He cupped her breast with one hand while still holding her leg with the other. I could come in my jeans from doing this alone. He ran his palm up and down her nipple, causing the little bud to tighten. Further she wanted the damn shirt and bra off, wanted the offending material that blocked her from Hilly feeling his skin against hers to tom away. Yes, she had said she wanted to take control, but right now she wanted Damien to the one to dominate her. I want nothing but five in us. In the next instant he had her shirt off and reached behind her and unlatched her bra. The material slid down her arms, and he tossed it aside. He pulled back and looked at her bare breasts. It was like he was reaching out and touching her. It penetrated her, sealed into her body, and had her only thinking about being with this lion. He stepped closer, pulled her into the hardness of his body, and claimed her mouth. His groan vibrated against her lips. He moved his mouth down her neck. The lower he went, the deeper the sounds. His hot, humid breath teased the Iraq of one of her breasts, causing the turgid tip to stiffen or the biting her bottom lip until she tasted the tangy flavor of blood, waited for Damien to suck the nipple into his mouth for several long, agonizing seconds. All she felt was his warm breath teasing over her. You're torturing me, spearing her fingers into his hair. She tried to pull him closer to her chest, pleading with her actions as well that she wanted this. But trying to move Damien when he wasn't ready to do so was like moving a stone wall. That's the last thing I want to do, he said in this husky, arousal-laced voice, and he believed him. God, did she believe everything he said, but her insides turned to mush around him, and her instincts told her that this man would always be there for her. It scared her, but most of all it had her melting against him for more. 13 Danica tightened her fingers in Damien's hair. He gave one last groan, covering her left nipple with his hot, wet mouth and sucking long and hard. The blood rushed to the surface and swelled under his ministrations. For several agonizingly pleasure-filled seconds all he did was suck on her breasts. He alternated between them, drawing the tissue out with his teeth, and then dragging his tongue over the slight sting he caused. Danica was vaguely aware of the sounds coming from her, ones that should have made her embarrassed, but she couldn't comprehend anything because the ecstasy was far intense. Her panties were soaked, and her pulse beat in her clit. She knew he smelled her arousal, and he proved as much when he slid his palm down her belly, pushed her skirt up over her hips, and pushed his hand down her underwear. At the first touch of his fingers in her slick cleft, Danica cried out, "It feels so good, Damien." She had meant the words to be thought, not said, but she was glad she hadn't censored how he made her feel. "Yeah, it really freaking does feel good, baby." He continued to stroke her slowly. "You're so fracking wet for me, Danica." He slipped a thick finger into her pussy and started pushing it in and pulling it back out slowly. "And it's all for me, baby. You're wet and primed, and ready for my cock. Tell me you're this soaked for me, that I'm the one that made this pussy juicy." He murmured against her chest. At the same time he pressed his thumb to her clit and started working the bundle of nerves back and forth. "Damien." His name fell from her lips like a plea. She was begging for more. All she wanted was to iron naked so they could rub themselves against each other in erotic bliss. She wanted to grind herself on him. God, did she want to do that desperately? It was like she was a fiend, and this stranger had suddenly taken control of her and was now in charge. Danica let go of his hair and moved her hands there. Damien let out a hoarse growl, grabbed her ass, and hauled her up his body. She wrapped her legs around his waist, and pressed herself on his dick, rubbing her pussy on him. Hissing out a curse, he took her mouth in a hungry kiss for long, drugging seconds. He broke away only long enough that he could stride out of the living room and into his room. All Danica could do was hang on, close her eyes, and inhale everything that was him. Even the smelled like him. The sun was starting to set, and she watched the light start to through the slightly parted blinds. He started kissing her again, and Mole Sevenicle his mouth down to the mark he had given her not long ago. Taking hold of chunks of his hair in her hands, she brought his mouth to hers and kissed him like she had never kissed another person before. Their tongues pressed to one another, and when he retreated she followed into his mouth. It was strange taking control, and in all honesty she wasn't sure if she liked it, because Damien was dominating in the best of ways. A gasp left her when she felt his canines lengthen against her mouth. He moved his lips down to her and dragged them across the slightly protruding bones. He moved them over her back and over again as if he couldn't get enough of act. Before she could even take a breath her back met the mattress, and then Damien was tearing her skin and panties off, and before she knew what was happening she was lying on his bed naked and needy for him. He placed his hands on her knees and pried her legs apart slowly. Closer and closer he smoothed his hands down her inner thighs until he came to the area of her body that ached the most for him. "At me, baby. Watch as I touch you, claim you for the second time." Forcing herself up on her so she could see what he was doing, her legs was harder than she thought. Her limbs felt like pudding, and a jittery sensation coursed through her veins. Damien lifted his gaze to her, and she held her breath. "I want you to watch your mate eat your pussy out and look so every fracking minute of it." A high settled into her, and she parted her lips as he lowered his head to her pussy, never once taking his gaze off of her. And at the first lick of his tongue on her cleft she clenched the sheets in her hands and prayed that this would last forever. 14 Fuck, her pussy was the hottest flicking thing he had ever seen. When his mouth was only an inch from the soft, supple lips of her pussy he broke eye contact with her and looked down at her. "Cunt, damn, baby, you're so pink and wet for me." He licked her cunt, sucked at her pussy lips, and then he ran his tongue up her cleft and sucked on her clit _ she was pearled and glistening from her arousal for herm. How in the hell did a bastard like him get so damn lucky? Her clit was swollen and red and just begging for him. Latching his mouth over the engorged bud, Damien sucked on her like a starved man. She tasted so fresh that he grew thirsty for more. I'm so very hungry for you, baby. He licked her so many times he couldn't feel his tongue, but he didn't stop, couldn't. She made these needy little sounds, ones that drove him absolutely crazy with lust. Moving his hands down her thighs, he stopped when he framed her pussy _ tacking his thumbs and spreading her labia apart, he lifted his gaze up the length of her body. Her eyes were closed, lips parted, and her large breasts heaved from her increased respirations. Fuck yeah, she was right here with him, experiencing it. He went back to attack her cunt with his lips and tongue. You taste so good, so sweet. As he ran his tongue up and down her slit, she became so juicy for him he couldn't help but growl against her swollen, soaked slit. Damien, I'm so close. Her hands were bunched in the sheets, pulling at the material as she thrashed her head back and forth. I want you to fucking come all over my Danica. Sucking on her clit, he felt her body starve to tight hem. He placed a hand on her rounded belly, and loved how she was all curves, thickness, and lushness. Holding her still, he took his other hand and pushed 2 fingers into her pussy _ he was slow, not being rough, despite that his lion was right there, wanting to take her like an animal. A cry of ecstasy left her on a long wail. God, baby, that is so it. She lifted her hips and ground her cunt against his face. The wet, slurping noises of his mouth between her legs had his cock throbbing. Damien started pressing his hips into the mattress, trying to alleviate the pressure. His balls were going to explode if he didn't get his cock inside of her and fluck her like a mate claimed his female. Damien, God, yes. His name came out of her on a long moan, and that was his breaking point. Dragging his tongue down her cleft, he slipped his hands under her ass, lifted her slightly, and continued his downward path. He licked at the puckered hole of her bottom with just the tip of his tongue, allowing her to grow used to what he was doing. When she started panting again, he used more force, licking her hard than sucking on her flesh. Her pussy juices slid down the crack of her ass, and he devoured her. She tasted salty and musky, and it drm.e him flacking wild with lust. With one more lick up the crease of her he pulled away. He kept her legs spread open with his hands on her inner thighs, and stared down at her pussy. His pussy, her chest rose and fell from her, and it had the alpha male in him roaring out in victory. He was the one that put that look on her face, and pride filled him. His pulse throbbed in his cock and her legs were still parted on either side of him. You hen, he rose and himself her, the feel of her wet pussy slipped along his length. He loved that she couldn't control her breathing. She reached between them, lifted slightly up, and positioned the tip of his dick at her entrance. He had to grit his teeth as her slender fingers wrapped around his cock and force himself not to into her at the feel of her wet heat against him. Their eyes locked, and he slowly started to push his cock into her. A deep groan left him, and her breath hitched. 1% en he was fully inside of her. He slipped his hands under her ass, clenched the flesh, and in one move had her over him. She now straddled his waist, her hands on his chest, and her mouth parted. She worked herself on him, and Damien clenched his hands against her hips to keep from taking control. Her movements were slow and somewhat unsure. Her breath hitched when she slid all the way down on him and rose back up, and over again, gradually picking up speed. For a moment he lost it and found himself thrusting up, deep and hard inside of her. I can't breathe, Damien, too, she moaned. His lion broke free, took the front seat in all office, and Damien couldn't stop him in a quick move. He had her on her back again, with his pelvis wedged snugly between hers. He speared his hands in her hair, tugging her head back and arching her throat. Your animal, downland_, she moaned. God, yes, having her throat bared was a soul tender all in itself, and she would know what it did to him, what it did to his lion. Running his now elongated canines up her neck, he loved that a shiver worked through her. She held him tight and lifted her hips, grinding herself on him. He was still inside of her tight, wet heat, and it was euphoria. Curling his hands in the sheets by her head, he started moving inside of her fast and hard, steady and power hell one. Sweat trailed down his hairline, and his skin felt too tight. Her pussy smelled so flicking good, and all he wanted to do was bury his face in the sweet spot once more. But his dick was a greedy bastard and pulsed, needing him to continue pulling out and pushing back inside. He let his gaze linger at the base of her throat where his mark was on her flesh. He followed the path of her body between her breasts, down her belly, and stopped at the top of her pussy. Her clit protruded, begging for attention. With his cock lodged in his mate's body, Damien flacked her good and thoroughly. Their sweat-slicked stomachs touched, and he pushed another inch into her when he thrust in deep. Damien. She gasped out his name. I feel so stretched, so a rumble left him when her tight little body clenched around him. Slowly and with measured movements he continued to move in and out of her. Her inner muscles tightened around him, then relaxed. His balls drew up tight with his impending orgasm. He was going to fill her with his seed, make her so full of it she would slip out of her pussy for the next week. For several long moments Damien didn't move, couldn't, for how good it felt. He wouldn't last long, not when she slid her hands up his sides and around to his back. Her nails dug into his skin, and she wrapped her legs around his waist, lifting up just enough that his arms were locked straight and his chest no longer touched hers. Damien pulled out of her wet heat and pushed back in. Slow is good, Damlen_, so but don't hold back, please. She arched her back, and her breasts rose up from the motion. Damien's gaze was trained on the sight of her nipples hardening even other, and he gave her exactly what she asked for. He sat back on his knees, encircled her waist with his hands, and finked her like he meant it, and damn did he mean it. The sloppy, wet sound of his cock tunneling into her cunt was an auditory orgasm all its 0vn_, he out of her every time he pushed back inside. She pulled at his hair, and the slight sting of pain felt so fucking good he pulled away, wanting her to know that there was nothing he didn't desire. I'm going to come again. She mowed her hands to his back once again and pierced his flesh her nails. The sensations were all-consuming pleasure and had his orgasm washing through him. Her muscles milked him so strongly that he threw his head back and roared out his climax. Fuck baby. Fuck. It's so good. He jerked against her as he emptied himself inside of her willing body, gave her every last drop of his cum. The fact he was filling her his seed, claiming her and saturating her with his scent had the animal in him clawing to get. You're mine, Danica. His voice was dystopied, his lion not relenting in claiming her. You will always be mine. He continued to thrust into her shallowly, sensing her climax still claiming her. He didn't want this to end, didn't want to pull out of her sweet, wet, and warm pussy. I can't promise I'll always be easy to be with, but I'll flacking try, Danica. Goddammit, I'll try anything for you. She stared up at him with pleasure-filled eyes. God, Damien, God. The saccharine scent of her increased desire filled his nostrils, and he closed his eyes and growled low in his throat. He cupped the side of her. Just tell me you are with me, baby. Maybe this wasn't the best time to talk this, but his lion wanted that assurance from her. She didn't hesitate when she said, I'm yours, and I'm not going anywhere, Damien. I chose to be yours, and I will always yours. His canines lengthened even further, and his muscles grew thicker as his animal tried to take supremacy. Leaning over her he first rattled the tip of his nose up the length of her throat, inhaling deeply and taking her delicious aroma into his body. He was hers as much as she was his. He smelled himself on her, felt the mark he had given her under his tongue, and he groaned. "You're only mine, baby." He had never felt so uninhibited with a female, and knew that it would always be this way, always. Letting his teeth scrape along her flesh, he felt her skin give him and then tasted the tangy, metallic flavor of her blood coat his tongue as he marked her for the second time. He ran his tongue along the wounds he'd created, his mark, letting his essence coast over the open area, fill the cementing that she was his. Of them was sated her, gave her neck one last lick and pulled out of her. Kissing her on the forehead before he got off bed, he headed into the bathroom, grabbed a warm, wet wash rag, and went back to her. Gently cleaning her between her legs, he noticed she was already on the verge of sleep. After setting the rag aside, Damien went the task of letting his hands glide over her smooth flesh. Damien didn't deny himself anything when it came to her, and so he leaned forward and started running his tongue around the delicate LXME of her ankle. She was pliant beneath him, not fighting his urge to taste all of her. He continued his upward path over her curled calf, over her knee, and continued onward until he was moving his tongue over her thigh. He repeated the action to the other leg, making sure to pay the same amount of fat and iron to it as he did the other. He licked a path over her hip bones, around her belly button, and continued over her ribs and to her breasts. He sucked on her nipples for far longer than necessary, but that ever more he liked the feel of her under his tongue. Finally forcing himself to continue memorizing her body with his mouth, he trailed his mouth up her throat and licked a path over his mark on her. He gathered her into his arms and sensed her slip into a deep sleep. I try, baby. I'll try to be the mate you need, and not the possessive meathead shifter that wants to kill anyone that so much as talks to you. It would be hard, but she was his life now, and would always be until he breathing with that he wrapped his body around hers in a protective embrace, and closed his eyes. Epilogue. 18 months later. She sat at the dinner table at her Athos house, not able to stop from smiling as she listened to her dad and Damien argue some small detail of a war story 2 decades ago. They fought like brothers, like one of them was the one that was right, and they would not relent until the other realized a year and a half had passed since Damien had told her she was his mate and that he had imprinted on her. In that time she had gotten a promotion at her job, moved in with Damien, and was looking forward to spending the rest of her life with her lion shifter. Her wasn't pleased at first that she had moved in with the much older Danian, but he also saw how happy she was. He rode her no matter what, and a parent he just wanted her to experience a life that she was happy with. Although she had brought up marriage with asking him what he thought about it, she had been surprised to find out he wasn't opposed to the idea, and in fact started going into detail about what he wanted in their lives. Although she wasn't ready to be married just yet, because she wanted to further her education and career, she was happy that Damien wanted the same things as she did. She brought her cup to her mouth and smiled over the rim as her dad started laughing at something Damien said. "I think you want the story to go in your favor," her dad said, and started laughing harder when Damien growled low. "I just know the truth of the story," Damien said, and started laughing again. He wrapped his arm around her shoulder and pulled her close to him. Although she had never seen herself mated to a fierce and protective lion shifter, she couldn't imagine herself not with Damien. He was everything she wanted in a partner, and he expected her to be someone she wasn't. With her supportive Atha standing behind her every step of way, she was in a very good place in her life, and couldn't have asked for more. Happiness surrounded her, and there wasn't a day where she wasn't smiling because of it. The end.